This
program.
conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So I am the program director for our opioid overdose prevention program. We are registered both with New York City Department of Health and the New York State Department of Health. And I'll talk a little bit about that process, during our time together. I do want to encourage and invite questions via the chat. I have multiple computers running this morning, so I can see the chat in real time. And I've also set aside time for us to have conversations around certain key pieces. A little different, obviously, doing it virtually, but I think we can share and learn from each other throughout the process. To give a little framing around the piece that we're doing here, we I mentioned being a registered program, but we also have a NIH funded implementation science grant project going. It's a two-phase piece. Phase one was a planning grant, which allowed us to do data collection, curriculum development, and a number of other pieces to really learn about how to do this work on campus, and what would make it germane and relevant to folks on our campus. And then the second part, which we're currently in, is the actual facilitation of trainings, the collection of data, et cetera. In the setup to all of this, when we made the decision to add opioid education and naloxone training as a part of our comprehensive approach to alcohol and other drugs, one of the things we did, of course, as we all do, right? You go to the literature. What does the literature tell us are the best practices or the evidence-informed practices? There's very little for doing this work on a college campus. There's some really helpful community resources and studies that have been done, but very little of this has been actually studied in higher education. And that's what drove parts of our implementation science grant. We actually have this active study running with students as well as faculty and staff. It is a mixed method study, and I'll talk about little pieces of it along the way. But it really is to understand, are we accomplishing the objectives we set out to accomplish when we build and offer these types of programs on a college and university campus? Our hope is that it helps move the needle in terms of the field. And being in higher ed for so long, I've learned and seen that we do amazing amounts of work on our college campuses. There are many things that have been done in Illinois schools that I have used as inspiration in my own work, but we don't always study it and publish it. And so what we're trying to do with this particular project is both save lives with our naloxone work, but also study it in ways that it will then appear in the literature. And, for example, if you're not currently doing this on your campus, that you can point to some of this and say, it's not just a good idea, there's actually evidence behind this work. Equally so, if there is anything that's not working, we want that to appear in the literature. You don't see a lot of articles of look at all the work we did and nothing happened. But those types of studies are equally valuable, so it prevents people from kind of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get a different result. So that's all my introductory framework pieces. There are planned 8 sections to our time together, which is a lot for just a couple of hours, but hopefully we'll get through all of it. You should have been emailed a set of materials. It's a lot of documents. These were all the handouts and pieces that were prepared for today, and I will refer to various ones at times, display them on the screen so you know kind of which one. If you want to treat them as worksheets, there's several that are intended to be filled out. Feel free to print those out and scribble on them as a note piece along the way, or if you can complete them digitally, that obviously would work as well. Sorry, I'm realizing I'm hitting buttons on the wrong computer. My apologies. We are educators, right? So we have learning objectives for today, and these are the 3 that were established for our time, really looking at why we do this work, right? The rationale for why this would be a part of our work on a college campus. Specifically around that rationale, we will spend some time looking at why people don't think we should be doing this work on a college campus, and how you might, if that is a pushback, for example, and at your institution, how we can use what we know to kind of push through. We will talk very specifically about data, and I will give you very specific examples of data that guide this. One of the pieces around the data, I do want to kind of self-disclosure. I teach evaluation of health programs at Columbia, and I teach research methods for undergraduates and graduates at the City University of New York. So I'm a complete data nerd, and feel free to chat me a message that says, okay, enough, we get it, if I go on too long in that section. All of the data pieces, though, that I will talk about, if you are interested in copies of instruments, whether it's the pre and post survey, which has already been emailed out, or if you want to see the questions from the interview guide or the focus groups, all of that is available to you. Happy to send it out and share. The ones that were shared in advance are ones that are, we've had the most requests for, so that's the ones I wanted to just proactively share. But again, part of what we're trying to do is be a resource to the rest of the field, and offer that both training and technical assistance around these programs. And then I think what is the meat of the conversation and the piece that most people want to know is, what does it look like to set this up to replicate an existing program? What do you need to do to make it work on your campus? How do you evaluate it? And I'm hoping, and most of the worksheets are built around that idea. Is kind of keeping some notes so that this is not supposed to be a show and tell about what we do at Columbia. It is using the Columbia piece to inform how this might happen as other schools move to do this work. This slide is a little different and a little unique because I'm not used to doing a training and saying, this is what I'm not going to talk about today. But given the breadth of information that could come up around these issues, I felt it was very, very important to be clear that this training is not about certain things. So we're not going to talk about the etiology of the opioid concern in the United States. I think we get that this is a problem. And I think hopefully you're here because you already know that. I will acknowledge in varying points along the way, what that looks like in communities will vary based on geography. So while I won't go through the numbers for the country, I will remind you that it is important to know what that looks like for your community. New York City is going to be very different than if you were in Carbondale, for example. We're not going to talk about why students use opioids. I will share some of the NCHA data about it, but just very briefly, motivators for use are not the focus today. It is something, though, that may be germane if you're setting up or refining a program that you might have. We're not going to talk about which opioids are the big deals. I have slides on all of that. If you're interested and just want them to use, just let me know. I'm happy to provide that. We're not going to talk through recognizing and responding to an overdose. We're not going to talk about the mechanics and of how naloxone works in the brain. Again, all things happy to share, just that's not the goal of our time together today. And we're actually, it's digital, so we're not going to be handing out naloxone kits. In fact, this move to kind of virtualizing higher education has been very interesting because I have a number of trainings scheduled where I would actually be teaching people how to recognize and respond to an overdose, how to administer naloxone, and actually providing those kits. And so we're coming up with a multi-step process to facilitate kind of the online learning followed by the in-person dispensing, or we're even contemplating mailing naloxone kits to participants. But so if you're interested in seeing what a training looks like as I spin up these virtual ones, I'm happy to include you just so you can see what our curriculum looks like in a live session. But again, we won't be doing that in our time together this morning. Some additional background, and this is hopefully to get you started thinking. I want to tell you a little bit about the partners that have helped us get to this point. We have a lot going on with our program and we're very excited about it, but we did not get here on our own. And that's an important piece to really acknowledge. We in Columbia Health, as the student health service for the institution, we're very interested in kind of adding this to our portfolio. We have a deep roots in harm reduction, and we see this work as a part of it. Um, but we also knew that if this was going to work, given the politics of our institution, that we couldn't come at this as kind of student health wants to do something. That wasn't going to fly. And we'll talk later about identifying those stakeholders and some of those challenges for your institutions. And there is a kind of a worksheet around stakeholders that we'll talk through in a little bit. But just to frame kind of the approach so that you can start thinking about how you would populate those lists. We have on here just, and this is a partial list, by the way. This is not a complete collection of everybody we're using as a partner or working with or relying on or calling upon. But we've got our student health service where we're called Columbia Health. We have the Mailman School of Public Health, and not just because I have a faculty appointment there. My actually former department chair is a full professor there. She is now the dean of the School of General Studies, which is the next bullet. We do have other faculty from public health. We have a doctoral student who is part of the research team. So it's really pulling on a number. So it's students and faculty there. Columbia College is our largest undergraduate student group. If you're not familiar with our institution, we have 16 schools and colleges and some affiliates, but we're 80% graduate and professional degree students. I always say we're a graduate university with undergrads thrown in to see what will happen. Columbia College is our largest undergrad, and the bulk of our research is being done around undergraduate students and their participation in these types of programs and what they learn from these trainings, simply because that's our student profile is not what the majority of college campuses are like. So we wanted to study it in a way that it would be more broadly useful to higher education as opposed to just what made sense here. We do have faculty from the College of Physicians and Surgeons. Our medical director in the program does have a faculty appointment at PNS. Public safety has been a big part of our partnership here. And interestingly, people always ask me, why is student financial services part of your team? And the answer is the biennial review, right? They're the ones that hold that report, and might be, if they're audited, that's where we're going to get asked for that. And this is an important part of connecting to that broader work. So we've had them at the table kind of all along. Some of this collection of on-campus partners also came out of our work with the JED Foundation. And one of the objectives from our work with the JED Foundation was actually to look at specifically at opioid prescribing. We have our medical record says we have very low numbers. And if you haven't looked at your opioid prescribing, and if you have prescribers in your clinic, it would be a good way to start taking a look at things. What you'll probably find is that it's pretty rare. But they also suggested things like have a contract that every student signs if they're going to get an opioid prescription from you. And we took a look at that contract and said, absolutely not. It's a complete barrier to the kinds of conversations that we have. What we thought it would do, and specifically this ties to our being located in New York City, people will just go elsewhere to source these things. And we didn't feel like that was actually helpful as a process, but it did encourage us to think more about the broader education piece. And then a few of the off-campus partners, I'm not going to spend as much time on these folks. We are working obviously with the NIH and the CTSA around the Implementation Science Grant. We have some faculty from the Psychiatric Institute on our team, and then we are working closely with the city and the state departments of health. The city is our source for our naloxone, which allows us to access the naloxone kits at no cost. That was a huge part of being able to start up the program when we did, is that we didn't have a budget for this. And we'll spend some more time later this morning talking about kind of how you budget and plan for this. I will say it's been a little easier for us because when we went to register as a site, the person at the City Department of Health sent me an email and said, "Hi, do you remember me? I was one of your students." And I responded, "I approved your master's thesis less than a year ago. Of course I remember you." And so having that connection obviously made our life a little easier And we have not faced the challenges that some campuses have. I don't know if it's because they're looking out for us, or the research, or what it is, but having that connection with the off-campus partners has made a difference in terms of setup. And again, I'm going to encourage you to think about who would you need at the table if you don't already have a program going. Other background pieces just about our program that might be interesting to you, because this has a lot to do if you build it, they will come. Our goal was to train approximately 400 people over 12 months. We trained more than 700 people in 5 months. This data is actually, this is not the most recent data. That number's gone up slightly because it says 2 lives saved so far. It's actually across the university. It's now at 5 lives saved that we know of. So this was, we are not the only naloxone program at the university, because we have multiple campuses. So the 5 covers all of our campuses. But it took the work which we had been building from hypothetical, right? We're doing this because we want to save lives, to we're continuing to do this because the people we've trained have saved lives. And that adds a real power to being able to move this work forward. But I also want a heads up, if you aren't doing this and you start, you need to be prepared for what happens if demand is super, super high. And again, we'll talk more about that and some lessons learned later in the morning. Okay, so that's the big framing piece that I wanted to just kind of get out there. But now I need to hear a little bit from you all in terms of your connection to these pieces, and you're welcome to unmute yourself and comment, or you're welcome to use the chat. Please use the mechanism that feels most natural and appropriate for you. But I'm curious to get a sense of how many people already have some level of naloxone or opioid education program happening on their campus. And if you do chime in by voice, would you please identify your campus as well?
Hi, it's Lisa from College of Lake County. We have our police and our school nurse equipped with Narcan. A lot of us have been trained, including myself, although we don't have immediate access to the product. And then we work in our county with Live for Lolly that helps sponsor the national law. And so we do have a lot of people trained, and we've saved several hundred lives in our county through the program.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. I see Valerie noted that she has it on campus, as did Jamie. So I'm noticing that just from the chat comments that are being added, it sounds like law enforcement on a campus is a little bit of an epicenter of where naloxone is available. And we'll talk about that connection as we go through. Um, I'm guessing most folks are participating because they want to either expand this work or start this work. Um, but I'd be really curious, how many people are here just because they were told they should? Anybody willing to admit that? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Um, even if that is true and you just don't want to kind of say it out loud or type it out loud, that's no problem. Um, sometimes we get a thou shalt command when, especially if you work related to student health and well-being. A vice president will hear from a colleague somewhere and then say, oh, we're going to do that too. And usually we're told to just replicate what somebody else is doing. And I'm hoping that some of what we cover today will help you do it the way you know you need to do it for your institution, as opposed to just doing what someone else is doing and hoping it works in your community. Yeah, Jamie, your comment about efforts to make it available to students was not supported. We'll talk through some of those up and downs of where people have found success and challenges. I am going to share examples from other institutions beyond my own. Um, and hopefully that will help those of us, there are a couple of institutions where administration has just said, no, we're not going to do that, or we're not going to do it in this way. And, there's a lot of politics behind that, and we'll talk through some of the stakeholders and what their agendas may be, and how to potentially address that. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work, but going to try and do what I can to help you make the case that we should actually be expanding this work. Thank you all for sharing, both in the chat and verbally. So let's transition. We're already 25 minutes in, and talk a bit more about the rationale then. And again, please feel free to add questions in the chat, or stop me, unmute yourself and jump in, because I do want to I make this as useful. And the goal originally was that this was going to be a bit more of a conversation using pieces, which is a little harder to do in the virtual environment. But so as we think about why we might be doing this work, this set of bullets that's on the slide is kind of the common themes that we saw in the literature. By the way, we do have a lit review we can share if that would be helpful as well. But it's also what we've heard from colleagues who are doing this work around the country in terms of kind of what's motivating opioid education and naloxone programs on college campuses. I always start at the bottom on this one because that's what drives my work around this. It's the idea that we have a medication that can reverse, to at least temporarily reverse, the effects of an overdose for one type of substance. We don't have that for any other substances in the way we have it for opioids. And so we have an opportunity, if you ignore for a moment just the political leanings and opinions, we have a moment where we can literally save lives. And that's always been a part, I think, of what drew me to this work, is about, reducing morbidity and mortality. I don't think I knew it as that back in the day, but that's ultimately what it is. And I don't really want to get into the motivators for why people are using substances. Sometimes people overdose, and it wasn't on purpose. A lot of times it wasn't on purpose, and we have a way to help reverse that, and so we can truly save lives with this. And I use that as the primary driver in the conversations I have with any stakeholder group, right? I don't start with the, I know you might not be into this, or, let's not get into the motivators. I really start with, I'm looking for partners who are also interested in saving lives. And it tends to disarm people a little bit. I have heard from campuses, where people are there, that has no value. People are like, well, most of our students are going to be fine. So we don't know that we're actually saving lives. So which is, it's a little painful when you hear people make comments like that. But just to really think about it, and I'm not going to talk through every bullet on this slide, but why would it matter at your institution? Right? Why would your campus want to be doing this work? And that could be what motivates you to be, online with all of us this morning. It could be what motivates students who may have come to you or to others at your institution and said, hey, I think we need to be doing this. It's really trying to understand what's driving folks and recognizing that you will have multiple motivators, but how do you bring those together? And factor that into the institutional politics to make sure that you're getting at that kind of middle item of a supportive community. Let me give you one specific example that came from my institution. The legal name of our university is Columbia University in the city of New York. And the institution very much talks about how New York and being located in Manhattan is a part of our identity, it's a part of our connectedness, and that life doesn't just happen on campus. mean, we also will talk about what we call the Columbia bubble, which is our undergraduates who won't walk 3 blocks because it's so far. Um, but the actual reality, and we have a little bit of hindsight on this one. The 5 lives saved. It was our students who were trained who saved lives of non-Columbia affiliates off campus. And that speaks to that supportive community, right? We have naloxone traveling throughout the 5 boroughs of New York and other places. One of the lives saved was actually in Boston, while one of our students was there for a school-related travel. Um, it's about that connection. It's not saying that this is going to happen on our campus. In fact, you would look at it, if you look at the numbers, you would say education appears to have somewhat of a protective factor around this. So you would think we would be the ones that wouldn't be doing these trainings. But like the example that was shared just a few minutes ago, right? Across a county, hundreds of lives have been saved. And that's about the integration with the community. That's not about the campus. It's about saying we live here, we work here, we learn together, we help each other. And that can be a very, very powerful motivator for some campuses, for some communities. It won't necessarily be the case everywhere. For those that face situations where I had a colleague say that the resistance they faced around the why we might do this is people who use drugs know they're taking a chance and whatever will happen will happen. And those drug users don't want to quit. They don't want to have these resources. Of course, I fundamentally disagree from the public health perspective. But we also, in that harm reduction piece that I mentioned earlier, we know that we do have people who actually come to us in recovery from an opioid addiction. We have people who join our campus community who are still struggling. And we may be just through offering the training. The life we save may not be the reversal of an overdose. It might be somebody realizing that there are supportive individuals in the community that will connect them to the resources to get the help they need. The parallel I will occasionally use when it feels right is thinking about the work we do around violence prevention and response, specifically around supporting survivors of intimate partner and other forms of sexual or gender-based violence. Some of the people that come forward for help do so through our campus resources for incidents that may have occurred long before they ever joined our communities, but it's the first time they felt safe and supported enough to actually seek that help. And that's an important role we play in higher education, is to be those people that can help connect the individual to something that is actually going to create a meaningful experience and move them forward, both in their time at the institution and well beyond. The other piece I'll say about this just very, very briefly is if we don't talk about it, we're never going to chip away at those stigmas that were highlighted in that example that a colleague had shared with me. People just believe, this is not a moral failure. That's the way I describe it when I'm doing trainings. Opioid use or substance use in general, it's not about a moral failure. And if that's somebody's stance on it, so be it, but that's not the framework. And we'll never chip away at that mindset if we don't actually have open and honest conversations around all substances, not just opioids. What I want to encourage you to do, and this is a point where, if you'll forgive the weirdness of the screen display as I jump around for a moment, there is one of the resources that I have had sent out to you all is this Q&A, very, very simple sheet. And the idea with this is to think about either the questions you've already received from members of your community or the questions you anticipate needing to answer as you either build or enhance the work you're doing around this topic. Scribble some notes, right? Write down those questions and see how through our conversation today you might find some bits and pieces that will help you kind of answer those questions for others. Or, and it may not come from me, right? It may come from someone else who's on with us who will share a thought and you'll go, oh, that's a great idea, or that might be a good way for me to answer the question. But we have to start by figuring out what are the questions that we can anticipate or that we know we've already had. So that's a piece of why this particular resource is there for you. Okay, did I manage? There I am. Because to link this back to this slide, we had to go through a process of why are we doing this, right? We expected to be asked the question, why would you want to do this, and why would you want to do it now? One of the driving forces behind the spin up of naloxone programs and opioid education programs on college campuses in some communities has been tragedy. There have been a number of campuses who have lost students, faculty, and staff to opioid overdoses. And you see a call for and a drive to offer programs that can help prevent that from occurring in the future. And it's horrible when that happens. I don't ever want any campus to have to go through that. But not everybody is going to be motivated by that tragedy, both in terms of, yes, you should still do it, but also, this is a problem we faced. Our program was not the result of an incident or a tragedy. And so we were anticipating and did get the question, why we're not seeing any signs that this is a problem here, right? We've had no overdose deaths. We've had no what have you on our campus. Why is this an issue? And we had to be prepared to answer that question. In the intro slide, you saw the little name placard picture. You may have seen the name placard picture. We had the opportunity back in the fall. We were invited to actually present on our work at the White House with ONDCP, Office of National Drug Control Policy, the Surgeon General, and a number of other kind of key leaders. And first off, I'll tell you, it's very intimidating to sit across the table from the Surgeon General. It's also a little surreal, regardless of your political leanings, to actually be on the grounds there for work. But I was on the panel that I was presenting on. A colleague from one of the Alabama schools was also there, and her motivation and her campus drive around this work were driven by the fact that her daughter died of an overdose. And it was even more tragic because her friends were so afraid of getting in trouble, both with the police and with the campus, that they attempted to hide her body. And it was just heart-wrenching to sit there and think, like, I cannot imagine what she went through. I commend her for trying to channel that into an opportunity to save other lives. But to be the next speaker and talk about why we do this work and say, because we felt like it was the right thing to do, it could save lives, and it would definitely round out our prevention and education programs, it just felt so different. So I want you to think about the how you would answer the why question. Why would you do this, and why would you do this right now? As I've said, it's about saving lives for me. But that's my personal motivation for doing this, even though and I'll just kind of self-disclose, there is no personal connection to this issue for me. I just believe that it's something that we can do and it can make a difference. And it reminds me of my high school days when I was naively believing if I could just help one person, it would all be worth it. And I've learned that I should have higher goals than just helping one. I think we can help whole communities by doing this work, but also figure out why it's right for your end, right? Why is your campus doing this? So take it beyond I'm talking a lot about the individual, but take it beyond that and kind of make some notes for yourself about why your campus would be doing this work. Let me stop there and invite questions about things you've heard about motivators for the rationale for programs, or challenges you've run into that you'd like to take a moment to kind of talk through in terms of the why we would be having these programs on campuses. And again, feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat feature, whichever feels more appropriate for you. Thank you for typing that, Tammy, because I wasn't sure if anyone was there. Okay, I'm going to go with the seeing none at the moment, but again, feel free to jump in with those pieces along the way. I'm going to shift to the other side of that, and that's the why not. So these are the areas where, as you're thinking about whether this is the right move for your institution or expanding beyond what's currently available at your institution, these are areas where you may expect to see some pushback, right? There is definitely a low perceived need for this type of work in higher education, right? It's not that there's not a perceived need in the world and in our communities, but on campuses. Um, we recently had conversations with Department of Health because they were thinking about significantly scaling back or ending their support to college campuses around providing the no cost naloxone because they weren't really seeing students as a population of risk. And we really pushed back and said, we're with you. We hear this education is a protective factor around substances. Said, but we're not doing this because we think it's going to happen in our students. We're doing this because our students are citizens of multiple communities, right? They don't all live on campus. The majority, in fact, don't live on campus. Our students live in communities throughout the area. Our students work throughout the area. Our journalism school, our students are on campus on average 1 day a week. The rest of the time they're out in the city being journalists. And it, it's about saying we're training people who happen to be affiliated with the university because we're also training faculty and staff. We're not training people to prevent overdoses at the university, right? And that's a part of why we put of how we push back around this low perceived need. Other institutions, I've seen community colleges actually have good success with this. That's where we kind of drew our inspiration for our answer, was looking at community colleges who are doing this work and saying, we basically are the community. Right, you can't often tell the difference, and I reflect back on my days at working on at a 4-campus community college system and saying that that's exactly right. The boundaries between community and campus were often incredibly soft. Um, some administrators will wonder if this is a way of acknowledging some issue. We have a problem, we have a lot of substance use, we have what have you. Um, Usually not the case. Data is a good way to overcome that one and say, no, 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 this really is about helping. Um, And then the issue of liability is the other one that most frequently comes up. This is the one area where we got a little bit of pushback. My boss had the opportunity to share some of this work before our board of trustees. The only question we got was from a judge who happens to also be a trustee who wanted to know about the liabilities for the university, an answer we already had because we had researched that and we got a general counsel sign off ahead of time. Um, and his response was, that's amazing. Keep doing this life-saving work. And that was it. I don't know if we just got lucky on that or if it was because we were ready for the question, right? We were ready to have an answer to what does this mean for institutional liability? So a couple of things have been shared in the chat. So let's take a moment to look at those. Um, the first, Lisa is sharing that the state's attorney has been a huge reason for success and asking the question, have you had this sort of support with our efforts? We haven't at that level. The state of New York is very committed to naloxone programs. I think the uptake of those programs will depend on where you are in the state of New York. New York City is known for being a bit more liberal, a bit of a Democratic stronghold. Previously, I worked upstate New York in a at a 4-year predominantly undergrad institution in more of a rural community where there was less support for these things, but the law enforcement community, including folks like state attorney's office or county folks, were very supportive of these types of work. And what I would say is, how can that support be leveraged to bring other skeptics on board? Right? How do you develop those offices or those individuals into champions for the work that you're doing? So it's not really, hey, we want an naloxone program, we in health, or we in student services or student affairs, or even just as a campus, and say, our community needs this work. Our community needs to come together and talk about saving lives, and bringing those champions to that message, because after a while, and I know this from my own experience in the field, people just stop listening to me because they're like, we get it. We know you think this is important. Every conversation I have about is sleep on a college campus, people are like, yeah, we know the students need to go to bed. But instead of listening to policy recommendations, people are like, yes, that's not popular. So in this area, I think what you've done, and hopefully what others can do, is build some support and through those champions. Okay, Tammy is sharing that as a small campus of about 1,000, and people feel they're small enough that EMS and PD are close enough, you don't have to have it. Um, if you have it, you're admitting there's a problem on campus, kind of thing. So Tim, what I would share with you, and hopefully others can kind of weigh in on this if they're comfortable, this is that opportunity to talk about campus as community. And you feel free to use my example where, we have undergrads saving lives of strangers in town, right? They're not using it. We've had no reported administrations on campus. It's all been off campus, because I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but let me just share this general concept right now. There's two major models in making naloxone available in communities. One is training individuals, and one is having what they call place-based or communal kits. And we looked at both models in our lit review. We looked at both models in the literature. We talked to schools that already had programs, and we decided that place-based kits were not the right solution, but they could be part of the program. So we went with a both-and approach, although we have not rolled out communal kits yet. Because so many of our students are not living full-time on campus, they're moving throughout the city, they're traveling. We have global centers in 8 countries, or 9, sorry, now. Not that you can go visit them at the moment, but nonetheless, they're there. And they were part of our thinking. We wanted the naloxone to travel with the people as they moved around, so that it was close by when they recognized a moment of need, as opposed to saying, oh, I know, what I see happening looks like an overdose. I know I should administer naloxone. Where is the nearest naloxone, right? In our particular case, New York City is not a small place. I think about the first life saved, which was, it was near but not on campus, but it was a number of blocks away. The amount of time it would have taken that individual to get to, say, my building where we have naloxone kits, and then back to that person, or potentially wait for EMS to respond, could be the difference between reversing an overdose and the declaration of a fatal overdose. Right? So having to go find, get, retrieve, and then administer felt like a major barrier to saving lives. So we were able to get that argument of, yes, NYPD, FDNY, our own campus ambulance, they all were carrying naloxone, right? But that assumes that there's no other calls going on, that they're all going to get there within a few minutes. In our communities, fentanyl is much more of an issue than, say, prescriptive opioids. Some of the fentanyl in New York has been tested, and it is strong enough to produce fatal overdoses in as little as 6 to 7 minutes. 6 to 7 minutes is not enough time to go find a kit, retrieve it, and return to a person. So we really said, this is going to work most in terms of saving lives by having people take their kits with them as they move about our broader definition of community. Since making that decision, obviously it has saved lives, but we've also had people go through the training and say, can I have 2 kits? one that I can carry with me every day as I move around the city, and one to keep in my home because I live in a community where I know there are other people who are using opioids. And if I'm not home, or I leave my bag at work, which has my kit in it, I want to know I can still have that ready access. So it's a little bit of that both and kind of thinking. Um, our campus security, we don't have a police force per se, but we do have a public safety force. The sergeants are the ones that carry it, not all of the frontline officers, although that we're rolling out training. We've begun training for frontline officers. Hopefully, if you have a similar piece, whether it's a full police force or a public safety type unit, everyone in that group has, so that it's a little closer. We're talking about putting them at the security desks at buildings that have security desks. We're talking about co-locating them with AEDs. But this, when you go into communal kits or limited number of people, you're relying on those things being available. Part of what we're worried about with the AED program idea is who's going to check those boxes daily to make sure the naloxone kits are still there, because nothing is going to be worse for us as an institution if there is an on-campus need and somebody goes to the AED box to get the naloxone kit and there isn't one in there, right? Versus having people carry it around. So long answer to a relatively short question, but it is that proactive, prepared, and it's really, for us, it was about building on that community. So it's understanding the politics there, right? If those people are close enough, right? But what is the furthest point that one of them would be, and is that enough time, right? What if it occurs off campus? There's a lot of what ifs that you can kind of think through and not so much present, for example, in trying to build stakeholder buy-in as this is a scenario, but just saying if we do this in this manner, it will help us accomplish these things, right? It will make naloxone available in these places as opposed to in just a handful. And again, I'm just using that as an example. The resistance around optics and liability, like you're spot on, Jamie, absolutely spot on. People worry, what does this look like, right? Is this meaning do we have a problem bullet, right? I think a piece of how you respond to that, and we certainly learned this from other institutions as well in our process. Part of responding to that is saying we're doing this because we don't have a problem, but we have a piece of the solution, right? Try to shift the narrative from a problem-oriented narrative to a solution-oriented narrative. And say, aren't campuses leaders in our respective communities? And so shouldn't we be actually trying to help our communities? If you are in a community where you struggle with the town-gown relationship, this is a piece of a broader conversation there to say, we know our students, for example, live in the neighborhoods, and we want them to be able to help anybody in the neighborhood by training them how to do this. And liability, yes, what is the liability? And I will talk very specifically about laws later, but most state laws, not true in all places. If you're planning to go work in Texas, this isn't going to be true for you. But most states have some level of a Good Samaritan piece that will actually cover the liability from the institutional perspective. And when you train individuals to carry the kits, you're training them as people, not as institutional representatives, right? So it's actually a greater liability if you're giving it to your police than if you're just giving it to a lay citizen. It's the same truth around CPR, right? If CPR is being trained by a university representative, then you have to deal with university liability. But if it's being done by a layperson who has been taught how to do this, they have a certain level of usually state level liability coverage. It's a fun little piece to point out to people, and they go, oh, does that mean? Now the flip side is they're like, maybe we take it away from our police. And I'm like, no, that's not what I meant, right? So think carefully how you word that. But the law is on our side in doing this work in most states. Illinois does have a Good Samaritan law, so it's on your side. The trick is understanding that and knowing that key information so that you can then use that to address it. Right? That's a good example of a question to anticipate, and then figuring out, well, here's a copy of the law and here's how it protects us. And if you have a champion in your general counsel's office, most depending on the size of your institution, you may only have one person as your general counsel. You may have several people that work in that. If you have more than one person and you don't know who the individual is in that group that focuses mostly on student issues, they tend to be more willing to support this than somebody who's thinking about it from an institutional liability perspective. They're thinking about it from a student perspective. That's how we kind of broke into the conversation with our general counsel, is like, hey, we think training students who just happen to be students but are also people who live in New York could actually be a good thing. Here's what we've already learned about the laws. Please make sure we didn't miss anything. And they're like, yeah, students are just students, right? The bigger debate was, do we train RAs? Because they're both students and they have a campus responsibility. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. But other questions about the why or why not rationale? And thank you to those that have been sharing. Okay, I'll forge forward, but again, feel free to type in or jump in. So shameless uh, image of me speaking at the White House. I want to talk a little bit about how news drives our rationale and our conversation, right? And it's simply because the majority of the news is about the tragedy, right? If it bleeds, it leads kind of idea in the media. And I just put 3 examples here for you about student tragedies. Um, if you don't know about Jonathan Winnefeld, his father is now retired. I think he was a multi-star admiral, if I'm remembering correctly, but he and his wife um, have a foundation that does a lot of work about it. And I had the opportunity to meet Mrs. Winnefeld at the presentation we did that you see the picture from. Um, their son was in recovery when he went into higher education. And he was looking for and did not find recovery housing, and chose campus housing that he thought would be the most supportive. Um, he he ended up relapsing and overdosing on day 4 of his first year. If I remember correctly, I believe they were still in orientation when that happened. Um, and it's, to me, it, it it obviously there's the sad piece of losing someone that young and what they might have been able to accomplish, but it also serves as a reminder for us, not so much about the tragedy, but the fact that we have people who arrive in our communities already dealing with these issues. They are not products of our community necessarily. And one of the things you'll notice missing in the media is the good news, right? The campus work that we're all doing about saving lives, and the recovery communities, and the other ways we're supporting, health and well-being. And so that's where I show you this, which came out last month. There's a 5th life saved since this article was published, but we did a campus story about our students who have been trained in the lives they saved, and CNN picked up our local campus news story, and then it's run on the websites and what have you of other affiliates who have syndication agreements with CNN. So if you're in the northern part of Illinois and you look at some of the Milwaukee news, you may actually have seen this story, because there was a Milwaukee station that also picked up this story. But it was just a tremendous opportunity. And of course, we feel so incredibly grateful that somebody wanted to tell the good news, right? And to really put this out there. But I share it, and there's a link to the full story in the slide deck. You should have received a copy of the slide deck. But there is a link at the very end in the resources section to this news story, because it may be helpful as you try to make those arguments and fight against the why not rationales of saying, look, there's good news out there, right? These students are saving lives. What I think is rather amusing about this picture is that it was a very clearly empty day on our campus, and it looks about the same today. So taking that why not, let's really start talking about things like making the case, right? About getting there. When you're making the case either to add to what you may already have in your communities or get started with this, let's just own the fact that opioid use rates are pretty low relative to our population, right? They're going to vary by community, right? But as a whole, it is not the majority of our population that is using opioids the way that we can look at our data and say the majority of our students use alcohol, for example. Or an ever-growing number moving towards a majority may use marijuana at least occasionally, right? And I said this before, but just to reinforce the idea of people are prepared usually to have this conversation with us about the problem. Opioid education, naloxone training programs on campuses are not about the problem. They're about bringing solutions to communities. And we may need to reframe that narrative as we move forward, and not let the detractors define how we approach this issue. I believe very firmly that if you work in health and higher education, you speak multiple languages, right? You understand the language of health. You understand most of the time the language of higher education. Um, you understand how these two come together. What frustrates many of us that have been doing this for a while is that we always wonder, like, why don't people understand what we mean when we say things? And it's usually because we're trying to get them to speak our language instead of using our ability to be a bit like a universal translator, right? Understand the language they're using, which allows us to then shift the narrative, right? They come at it as a problem and say, and being able to do something as simple as, I hear you, right? And to help you, I want to talk about ideas we have on a solution, and literally naming it as a solution, because people like to know how you're going to help make their life easier, right? I come at a lot of my work of, tell me how I can help you or help your team, right? That's what I'm doing with COVID-19 right now, is how can I help your team get through this? Knowing that that just totally sets up a longer to-do list for me, right? But it's about building that connection and shifting from a, oh my God, what do we do, to a calmer, more rational, here's ways to move us forward. Won't work for everybody, right? But it's just a strategy that may be useful. Um, and if you can get that out there before there is a driving incident, it becomes even more powerful when you have to respond and say, yes, we've already been doing, and now we need resources to do more. Right? Part of this solution oriented, in my thinking, is a not so subtle attempt to muster resources to keep this work going forward. Are there other thoughts, or for those of you that do have programs, at least in some level going, are there other ideas or statements you would offer to colleagues about making the case for your respective campuses? Okay, seeing none at the moment. We're almost done with this section. Um, a little bit of rationale pieces that maybe, oh, sorry, Jamie has a question. Wondering what might be the best approach to begin another conversation about this when I already have received a firm no. Excellent, excellent question, Jamie. Um, I think you're pointing at the idea of, like, pick your timing, right? When is the right moment? Um, I am not ashamed of trying to take advantage of an opportunity if it's going to benefit the health and well-being of our community, right? If I see something happen that's going to allow me to move the work forward, I'm totally going to do it. So, and I'll use some very specific pieces that hopefully that might help, are things like sharing the link to the CNN story and say, oh, this was just shared with me and I thought you might find it interesting as well. No ask, nothing, just simply putting it out there of, like, hey, we talked about this once, thought you might want to see this, and literally just letting it sit. for a little bit, right? And trying to find that moment. And then when somebody pops up and says, oh, what are we doing around this? You say, well, we've thought about, right? Which is true, even if you got to know, you've thought about doing this. I wonder if we should revisit that conversation, right? Higher ed suffers from a we've always done it this way kind of piece, and nothing is making it more apparent than our need to rapidly transition to primarily online learning and make adjustments with COVID-19. We're really understanding just how rooted in the old way we are, because it wouldn't be so challenging to move forward if we weren't stuck in that. My institution was founded in 1754. It's older than the United States. We behave like that far too often. And I even say that in meetings, like we need to stop behaving like Alexander Hamilton. Yes, that Hamilton was a student here, right? We also joke that he was a student with the director of our counseling center, because that's the joke that the director of our counseling center makes, right? But we need to say, look, the world has changed. This topic has changed. Should we still be doing things the way we used to do it? Or is it worth revisiting the question simply because we have some new information that suggests we may want to revisit? It doesn't mean you're going to get a yes, right? But sometimes we chip away. Think about the students that get their way. They do it because they don't give up, right? So how can we, in a politically appropriate and savvy way, not give up, but simply keep those questions going? The other piece I would say is to this very specific question about, I've already gotten a firm no. If people want to know what our rationale is for a yes, I don't think it's inappropriate to understand the rationale for the no. So a question like, it would really help me to understand why this wouldn't be appropriate for our institution, just so that I know and that we're all on the same page, right? Make it almost a point of information to the extent you are able to pose that question to someone. I always recommend doing those conversations not in writing. Because it's hard to read tone. If you can do them either face-to-face or at least visually using tools like Zoom or Skype or whatever system your campus may use, you can kind of see how the body language is, right? If you ask even a softball question and you can visibly see somebody start to tense up, you read that as, okay, I can't go too far with this right now, but I can at least kind of not let it go, but also not push too hard. Our students are also great. How do we get the students to be the ones that keep asking? I am completely shameless at times where I will be in the vicinity of some of our student workers and I will say something like, it's really interesting that the campus newspaper hasn't done any stories about, and then I just kind of insert the topic I want them to do a story on. And usually within a couple of days, there's a story. And it kind of brings it to the consciousness of our student population, or at least some of our students, the ones that still read our campus paper. And using that, and I'm not like ashamed of what I do or how I do it. It's really just saying, like, students have a voice that I don't have here, right? They can ask for things that I outright could not ask. And so how do I bring them in? I used the term earlier about champions, right? How do we find these champions to bring it up? There's also the suggestion from Lisa around guest speakers or screening a documentary, the one that was mentioned yesterday. And my apologies for not being able to participate in any part of the yesterday piece. I was knee deep in trying to. I got the command on Tuesday afternoon to spin up a cough and flu clinic with our Columbia Doctors faculty practice, and it had to be ready for patients by Friday. So I was a tiny bit distracted yesterday. But that's actually a really, really great suggestion, right? Where are there other areas that have been successful? How can you leverage speakers to advance the agenda? I do that for one of the Connecticut colleges that every year they invite me to campus to do a guest presentation because it's around a topic that people are very hesitant to discuss on their campus outright. And we have an agreement. I'll keep coming and keep keep bringing the conversation, but if they ever get too much pushback, I won't question why I'm not invited back, because it gives them, we have a unwritten agreement that they can always blame it on the guy from Columbia. And I have no problem with them blaming me if it allows their campus to at least have on some level a conversation. These are great ideas and great questions. So a couple other pieces just on the as noted on the slide. If you're not familiar with the visual that's on the right side of the slide, this is an updated version of the Institute of Medicine protractor. So this has the promotion piece, and just tries to help people understand promotion versus prevention. But specifically, when you're thinking about building the rationale for a program, the intent of an opioid education naloxone program is not actually to provide the same thing to everyone, right? There is not a universal prevention need here. The data tells us there are certain populations at risk, and the numbers that are being used on our campus are low relative to other substances or other health topics for that matter. So we don't necessarily need to do a love all, serve all kind of approach here. What we really need to do is understand our communities, understand our student population, and try to focus our education and training on those populations where there might be greater risk. And you have to be careful in how you say this, because you don't want to say it in a way that makes it sound like you are admitting there's a problem. But really, these are students who may be connected to communities where this type of training is beneficial. So the two sub-bullet examples I put here is saying about students at higher risk and students in recovery. Students in our recovery coalition on campus actually do a lot of volunteer work with harm reduction programs in the city. So we focused on supporting them and offering them training because they're in places where that indicated prevention work could happen. We also did this to create a parallel that felt less concerning. We did this in conjunction with an academic program. We have a school of social work, and our social workers in their field placements are often in communities where substance use, misuse, and abuse rates are higher than we would see on campus. So we're training students who are working with higher risk populations, right? It ceases to be about what we're doing on campus, and it really reinforces our fundamental belief that this is about connection to the community, right? And so that really helped us do that indicated prevention kind of approach when we were getting started with this work. The literature will tell you about populations at greater risk among college students, and I'm actually going to walk through some of the data collection that we did through a qualitative mechanism in the development of our program in just a little bit. Also think about connecting opioid education naloxone to other pieces, right? How is it reflected in your biennial? Are you doing a drug take-back day with the DEA, right? This is an opportunity to say, hey, we're already inviting people to drop off their old unused medications. What a nice way to round out even more of what we do to support. How do you factor in opioid education into the existing alcohol and drug education programs that we're offering, right? It's just it's just another piece of what we're doing. How do you train peers to be a part of that? We have students who are actually trained as trainers, and they facilitate training sessions for other students in our program, two of which were already approved trainers before we spun up our program. They got involved because we wanted to do this work on a campus. And they're like, well, if I can do it through my volunteer work in a community, can I also do it on campus? And it, again, you see the all caps, right? Save lives, right? I get this into every conversation I have because I really want to help folks understand on a campus that we are doing this to save lives, right? It really is about that. This is not trying to hide some other problem. This is not trying to prevent a lawsuit. It's about helping people. And in this case, it's about being able to have folks who can administer that medication and save that life. So we've reached the first big question slide. I know I've invited questions along the way, But I'm here, and we've had a couple of these, right? The firm no question already. But what else, right? What are the other questions you've received from administrators or others that are either on or connected to your campuses that it would be helpful to talk through some examples, whether I'm sharing responses or you all are sharing responses? And I am going to wait a little bit longer this time because I thought it might, people with typing. So there's the question, there are minimal risks to administering naloxone to someone who doesn't need it. What are those risks? This is a wonderful question and a big part of what we talk about in our training curriculum because this came up in our data gathering. What happens if I administer naloxone and it's not an opioid overdose scenario? And this is going to sound like a bit of a flip answer, but it's actually a very accurate answer. That person is going to have a wet nostril, right? Naloxone is basically inert in people who do not have opioids in their system. It does nothing. It is safe for literal newborns, right? They use it on dogs that have ingested opioids, like police dogs that have ingested opioids. They can use naloxone. It is such an incredibly safe medication that if it's given to someone, right, the risk is you annoy someone because they have a wet nose. And again, that sounds a little flip. It usually gets a giggle out of students in the trainings. Um, there really aren't risks to administering it to people who don't need it. Part of what most programs will train you in is if it looks like it might be an overdose, you act as if, because you can't hurt them, you can only help them. And in some of our training materials, again, which I'm happy to make available, including our complete slide decks and what have you for those trainings, we say like you cannot hurt them, you can only help, and we say it over and over again. So the good news is there really aren't risks, right? And it's a wonderful scenario to be in that we can do this life-saving thing without causing harm, right? It goes back to my statement at the very beginning, like what a unique scenario we have of a medication that saves lives or does nothing. So let's play with the saved lives part. So Valerie threw in, and this is a great comment, we don't have a problem on campus, so health services and the police can handle everything that may occur. Oh, that is so nice of everybody to make it your job to save the world. Um, and I'm sorry, I have a very strong, smart-ass, sarcastic streak, so I always usually have to have my reaction and then talk about realistically how do you respond, right? So they're validating you're a superhero, which is fantastic, right? Because you are. To do this work in higher education, you have to be. And they're probably right. We don't have a problem, right? But what if it occurs off campus? Right? That's the immediate fire back here. That's the flip side of this. If we don't have a problem and we do have a solution on campus, what are we doing for those that aren't on campus? And that was the epicenter of my argument and spinning up something here is that it's that community piece, right? So who are those resources in the community, and how can we do good in our community? Because Lord knows the campus gets blamed for everything. It feels like, especially if you're in a smaller community. That was my experience working on campuses in smaller communities. Is anything goes wrong, immediately it's blamed on the campus and the students. Not usually the case, but it's a quick scapegoat kind of thing. So maybe we reframe an answer to. I would reframe an answer to this and say, you're right. If it were on campus, we have a small enough campus, we can get there in three minutes, right, and administer that naloxone. But I I can't get there in 3 minutes if something happens off campus and the only person someone knows to call is me, right? So how do we build that community capacity? Do others have words of advice or ways to help reframe an answer to Valerie's statement? And then we'll come to Lisa's point around the costs. And if you're okay with it, please don't be afraid to unmute yourself and listen to a voice other than mine. All right, while we wait to see if anybody types in any more thoughts on that particular piece for Valerie, let's jump to Lisa's comment about individuals are worried about the use of tax dollars for addicts. Um, and adding on, work is largely through donated funds and grants, and that's a really excellent point, right? How are we using our resources, and are we putting our resources to people that others deem as not deserving potentially? And a couple of thoughts that I can offer on this, and again, I welcome thoughts from others. One, our naloxone and opioid education work includes what are the resources for people who want to get help, right? Part of our goal in doing this work is saving lives, but not just through naloxone. It's about individuals knowing how to get help when they're ready. If you've worked with these issues, you know that you can't make someone um, want to get help, right? But you want to be there when they're ready. This is a way of advancing the conversation, destigmatizing, and actually inviting people who may be struggling to to learn about these resources that could help them if it's their time, if it's their moment, when they're ready and open to that help. We can do that. I agree completely that if you can do that through non tax dollar pieces, we are a private institution, so we have a little more leeway. Interestingly, our naloxone is provided by the city, so as a private institution, our naloxone is paid for by tax dollars. Um, and nobody's brought that up, and nobody's really thought about what it costs, for example, in my time, right? We have a grant to study this, but it doesn't cover any of my salary. It does cover incentives for student participants in research, so that helps us. I want to talk very specifically about what does it cost to start and what does it cost to sustain a program in the second half of our time. Um, but I think there are donors out there. There are grant making organizations that really want to advance this work. The one that gets quoted more than others around because they have a kind of an opioid arm is the Clinton Foundation, and they have worked to get naloxone onto college campuses. But if you're not familiar with that group, the Clinton Foundation is actually more of an aggregator of funds as a foundation. So they are seeking donations as much as they are making resources available to others. They don't have a lot of money right now to kind of advance the naloxone and the opioid work on campuses. But there are other groups out there, and there's some smaller groups, and this is where perhaps you could look at smaller grant making groups in your communities or grant makers that want to give money to communities as opposed to large agencies or institutions like mine, which people all the time, Columbia has so much money, and I'm like, yes, and I have access to none of it. um, this program is partially through a grant, partially through me just working late, and partially through the city giving me some resources, right? We're not really funding this program using institutional money because I don't have access to any additional institutional money to do it. Um, so I think finding it and sharing with each other some of those ways, and that's also part of why we want to say, hey, if we can give you a curriculum, if we can give you a slide deck, if we can give you, if you use Qualtrics, for example, we can give you the Qualtrics file for the pre and post surveys, so you don't even have to spend the time to recreate it in Qualtrics. We just literally give you the file and you import it, and now you have your pre and post survey. We're College Health is a small community, and higher ed even is not as big as it is. It's not that big, and that's what we do. We share willingly with each other without request for compensation, and that helps us make this happen in so many places so much faster. Um, And two of the handouts that Aisha has sent out are the pre and the post that we are using at Columbia. And again, if you use Qualtrics, I'll send you the Qualtrics file, save you a whole bunch of time, specifically because of the display and skip logic, which always takes more time to set up. These are fantastic thoughts and questions and recommendations. I really appreciate you all sharing. Okay, so let me spend a few minutes on some data. After we get through the data section, I have scheduled a break because we've already been together for almost 90 minutes. And if you and that break will be, 5 or so minutes just for people to stretch if you need to stretch or use the facilities or what have you. But I think the data will kind of frame the second half, which is all about now, right, now what, right? Now, how do we make this happen on a campus? And we've been talking to some of those ideas already. Lisa also shared the Way Out program, which is modeled after the Angel program in Massachusetts. Those are fantastic resources. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. All right, data. So ACHA in 2018 did a survey. They got responses from 170 campuses trying to understand kind of who does what. This, to the best of my knowledge, this has not been replicated, but it may be time for us to ask maybe ACHA, or maybe we just collectively work together and do a field survey, or I'll not so subtly nudge Eric to think about how the IHEC team could perhaps do even a brief one just to understand the state of affairs with campuses. If they've already done that, I apologize for not knowing that if I didn't know that. But you'll see public safety or campus police, you've got about 2/3 carrying naloxone, and that was in 2018. So that's quite likely higher these days. About 40% of medical services on a campus had naloxone. And then you'll see, though, less than 10% had naloxone elsewhere, right? It was really being framed as a public safety medical kind of thing. And that kind of makes sense, right? There's a health component, there's a kind of emergency response rescue component. But part of what we argue, at least from the Columbia perspective, is that's great, but what about when those aren't the right resources for the situation, right? One of the pieces that we offer is most of our trainings are done as group trainings, but I will do one-on-one trainings for people who need rapid access to naloxone in their homes because they have a family member, for example, that uses an opioid and they're very worried. I'm not going to ask them to wait until the next scheduled training. It's like, stop by my office. I need 10 minutes of your time, and then let's get that naloxone into your hands, right? And that's something you can't, that's a need you can't respond to with public safety or medical being the only ones carrying it, right? There is, in addition to the ACHA survey, though, there's very little data on what else is happening in higher ed around this, and this is part of what's driving our work and our idea to do more research. Is really we're trying to fill a need that we don't feel was met. I've referenced the ACHA and CHA data in terms of use. This is formatted to try and help you use it with your campuses and with your colleagues. This is from spring 2019, almost 68,000 students across the nation. You see over a third of them are interested in receiving information related to alcohol and other drugs, right? So you have it's a way of kind of measuring and saying, hey, we have a population that wants to hear from us on these topics. Right? Yes, you can flip that number and say that, almost almost 2/3 don't want to hear from us on this issue, right? But it's also a categorical piece, right? I think if you asked about naloxone, and I can tell you from our own work, when we asked, are you interested in learning more? Are you interested in participating in a training? The numbers were very, very high, and I'll share some of that with you shortly. You can see the academic impact from drug use numbers. Students reporting a negative academic outcome related to their own substance use is lower, right? But again, that's not the argument we're trying to make. We're not trying to say that naloxone is going to help people get better grades, right? A lot of work around alcohol and other drugs is done about linking the health behavior with student academic outcomes. Opioids and naloxone is probably not a place where you can make that argument. Right. So by knowing that and saying, yes, I hear you, those numbers are low, but it's actually about, right, and going to that solution-oriented thinking. And then the use of prescription painkiller not prescribed to you in the last 12 months nationally was at 4.2%. If you have this data for your own institution, take a careful look at that. Because these numbers, while nationally are less than 5%, in some communities they're notably higher, and in some they're notably lower. Right? This issue does vary pretty widely. So look at that data and say, what is it here? Or how do we make the argument to collect this data? And it's an easy way to collect it if you do the NCHA, because you're doing population level health assessment. So you're not just collecting data on the opioid piece. It's a little safer way to get some of that data. And I know IHEC supports a lot of data gathering for the schools across Illinois. And then the table here is really intended to highlight the fact that students massively misperceive the use of opiates in their community. This is not unlike their misperceptions of substance use across a whole number of different substances. But they're overestimating use in the last month by 8,000%. To me, that's it's an opportunity to say, they're wrong in their belief 8,000 times over, right? Don't we have, as educational institutions, don't we have a bit of a responsibility to actually make sure people know facts? If you're doing a lot of work around coronavirus right now, you're probably, whether you're using these words or not, you're using the idea of facts over fear, right? There's perceived situations, and then there's what we know. And we're using the what we know to help people understand, because it helps alleviate the fear. Could we use those principles and say our work around opioid education and naloxone is actually about saying use is low, perception, big difference. Let's work on correcting that difference, right? It also gives you something you can measure over time, as well as supporting our community, right? It becomes another and. So hopefully that is at least a little bit helpful on some quantitative numbers and how you might use your numbers or even our national numbers, if it makes sense, to start to build programs. And then let me walk you through, and I'm going to do this relatively rapidly, but again, you have these slides and we're happy to share the questions that were used and all of that. This comes from our phase 1 study, trying to understand needs, concerns, what students wanted out of opioid education and naloxone training programs. Because there was such a lack of information in the literature, we didn't know what should go in the curriculum that would make it relevant, engaging, and supportive of the desires of students if they were to participate. And you see, if you look at the bottom bullet first, 95% of the people we talked to said, I want to do a training, and we think we should have it on campus, right? I don't even think 95% of our students want to go to class or eat or any of the other things, right? To have that level of interest in something that is voluntary, et cetera, says something. Now, that 95% is of the groups you see named above, right? So these are groups that the literature identified as having higher risks around both opioid use and overdose risk, as well as the RA population, which is a helping population. Right, so it's not an unskewed sample here, but these are people who are closer to the issue, and they're like, yes, we need this on our campus, right? And those students became such important champions to us being able to roll this out and get that institutional support in pretty quick fashion, right? So over phase 1 of it, and this was funded by the grant, we did 10 focus groups, 67 people. These are the groups that we ran. Literature tells us that fraternity and sorority affiliation, folks with a fraternity and sorority affiliation do have higher use rates of opioids relative to non-affiliates. So we felt like we should talk to them. The numbers, by the way, don't seem terrible, right? It's not, but yet there is just consistently in the literature there's higher use there. Students who are military, active duty military, ROTC, as well as our student veterans. If you don't know about Columbia, in just one of our undergraduate programs, we have more veterans enrolled than the rest of the Ivy League combined. And that it doesn't even represent all of our veterans. So we have a pretty significant population. And we know the literature suggests that use rates on opioids are higher in that group. Student athletes, specifically the competitive athletes, we are a D1 school, so those teams, it's usually opioids that are initially prescribed for pain, and working with athletics around, how we think about this. And we were able to get them on board pretty quickly because they're like, yes, um, we do have athletes that get those prescriptions, mostly though from our medical service on campus, right? So it helps us keep track of those numbers. And then students in recovery, I've talked about them before, and the RAs. The types of questions, thank you, Tammy, for asking. The types of questions I'm actually going to get into in just a minute. I'm happy to send you the complete list of questions that we use for our focus group, though, if that would be helpful. I can provide that to Aisha, and she can share that out to everyone, just so that you have it if it would be helpful going forward. Oops. All right. So as some of the questions we asked were around awareness of the issue, right? So we wanted to know kind of what do you know, what do you hear, kind of is there a problem on campus, that kind of thing. And we heard some pretty consistent themes around prevalence and what have you. We then asked also specific questions about if we offer this program, right? If we build it, what are you worried about, right? Both from a offering a perspective as well as what are your worries around this topic, i.e. naloxone and opioids, that we would need to address in the training curriculum. And then what do you think we should do, right? If this were to move forward, how should we do this on our campus, right? So the first slide shows you a synopsis of what we saw from the fraternities and sororities. We have a program here with our fraternities and sororities called the Alpha Standards, and I know many campuses use that approach or other similar approaches. So there's a certain amount of required training that is and education sessions. We do mandatory alcohol sessions. They call it party host training. We call it responsible event host training. One of the first things we did after learning this, just to give you a preview of how you use this information, we went to our fraternity and sorority life office and said, hey, is there a way for a naloxone education training program to help these organizations meet the requirements under the Alpha standards? They said, okay. I mean, literally no explanation needed, just like, okay. We had more questions than they did. They saw a natural fit, and so we were able to quickly address if you offer us a training that there isn't something in it for our group, I don't know if people would go because there's so many trainings they have to do. That group also wanted to know, if something happened and they used it at a party they were hosting or an off-campus gathering, what kind of trouble are we going to get into? And this was a piece of what helped us figure out how to include our campus Good Samaritan policy, as well as the importance of including the state law on this. And then the access piece, right? When we started this data gathering, we had not made a firm commitment as to whether we were going to do communal kits or individual kits. The access piece, there's an example here, but it came up in pretty much every group, even though it's not necessarily on every slide here. We heard over and over again, people wanted kits close. And that helped reinforce for us that the decision to train individuals was not because I thought it was a good idea, but that this is what the population who is going to do the training wants, right? And then there's some recommendations, right? I've already talked to the integration piece and the requirements. They did, by the way, believe that kits should also be in spaces in addition to individuals. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're definitely having that conversation. And then you see some of the qualitative kind of comments from people. On the athlete side, help seeking was a concern, right? And because one of our goals is connecting people to resources. They were afraid that that would be a downside, right? Will my coach know if I go to a training, if I administer naloxone, who do I have to tell? And if I administer it to somebody on my team, is that going to get the team in trouble? And that drove some of how we set up the training in terms of reporting. We are very fortunate that in the state of New York, when you administer naloxone, there is a reporting requirement, and that the minimum reporting requirement is the number 1 or the number 2, right? It's the number of doses administered when you responded. If you are willing to share or have data that you can share about the person who received the dose, the outcome of the administration, the city and the state would like that, but we literally only have to say one. Right? And including that in our training and helping people understand that if you administer, the only thing you need to do is tell us how many doses, and our entire response will be, here's how you get a replacement kit. And if you'd like to talk about it, here are the people that are available if you want to talk. In the case of two of the people that I've trained who have successfully administered, they both just wanted to talk about it after the fact as to what happened. But it's an option that we provide, not required. And it has helped us address that. They also brought up a very interesting thing that we're continuing to explore is this, what do we do around post-surgery pain medication and monitoring of that and how that might contribute to this conversation. So it's a bigger piece, and it wasn't something we anticipated, but it actually has helped us think about how we partner with our athletic trainers, for example, as champions around this work. Okay, next group is students in recovery. And they really wanted to focus on the stigma issue, and we include the piece I said at the beginning. If we don't talk about it, it just reinforces the stigma. We actually include that in our training, that this is a part of what motivates our work. And there is a concern that came out of this group, and we haven't figured out what our right language is about this, and we would welcome your input on this. The naloxone work is around harm reduction. We have community programs like AA, which are abstinence-based. How do you reconcile efforts that are abstinence-based and efforts that are harm reduction-based? As somebody who's been doing this work for more than 20 years, I say we offer a range of programs to support people who are in different spaces and in different places. Some people are looking for a harm reduction approach. Some people truly believe abstinence is the only thing that will work for them. I believe we should have it's an all, right? We want to have all of these resources so that people, if they try one and it doesn't work, it's not the only thing available to them, right? This group also recommended some things like, is there a way to get resources into the curriculum? They really couch that as the idea of students in recovery don't feel like they are an acknowledged population, and that lack of acknowledgement and that lack of you look around campus and you don't see people who kind of look like you, if you will, not meeting quite physically, but meet similar characteristics. If you don't know they're there, some of these students shared with us that they felt like it was a risk factor to relapse, that they needed to know they weren't the only one going through this. And so we have, for example, highlighted our recovery coalition in a number of pieces of our work. It's mentioned in most trainings, so that if folks are in this population, whether they choose to share that publicly or not, they know they're not the only one on campus. And that was a very helpful piece in terms of how we phrase certain resource elements of the training. Our military and veteran students were fascinatingly obsessed with the bureaucracy. That may have something to do with the bureaucracy and the hierarchy in the military, or everything to do with that. This group also had liability concerns, and they actually felt like other students wouldn't care because they didn't see opioids as a problem. And their big thing to us is, you have to explain what's in it for people who participate, right? If I'm going to do this training voluntarily, what's in it for me? Which we took to heart because we heard similar things. On a very, very personal level, I am not a fan of having to incentivize everything with our students. I am also a realist who understands that the college student motto is, where there's free, there's me. So how do we bring those to, and bad downside to electronic training, I can't hear if that made you laugh or not. There's a moment here of saying, that's actually a really good point, right? Students come to college not just to learn some things, but they have other goals, right? The degree attainment and how that sets them up for the success in the world, right? That's one of those benefits of going to college. We need to think about our work in a very, very similar way. This isn't just a, hey, you get naloxone, you could save a life, but this will also help you help others or help you with your community or do this or, kind of figure out the what's in it for them piece. And as you saw from the data earlier, I think we may have been a little too good at convincing people that this was worth their time based on the numbers that have shown up for our trainings. The RA side was the piece we heard the most about from colleagues when we were doing our information gathering and preparing this work. There's a real split in the field about whether RA should even be allowed to be trained. And then there's a split from the within yes group. Is it mandatory or is it voluntary? Driven our RAs on our campus very much about if I am an RA and I administer naloxone, what is my reporting requirement? Right? Because our RAs are mandatory reporters for a number of things. And they were really worried about how does this fit with our policy? Our policy is called the Responsible Community Action Policy. Many campuses call them Good Samaritan or medical amnesty policies. Like, how does this connect? And how do I know whether I'm responding as an RA or just a student who happens to live in a building and has a kit or what have you? And they were really focused on if they did this on campus. They had absolutely no concern in helping if they were off campus and not functioning in the RA role. Right? So understanding the split in these roles was really, really clear. And they said, the other thing they said to us is you need to think multi-stream in terms of inviting RAs and other students into this piece. We chose to go with a voluntary option in terms of training RAs. We did it as optional sessions during RA training that were scheduled at times that were on their schedule as free time, right? So they have free time, and during that free time, they could choose to do a opioid education naloxone training. This past fall was the first time we did that setup. More than 50% of the RAs opted into the training. They wanted to be trained. Number of those RAs were also involved in other campus groups, and so I've had one RA who's actually been through the training 3 times. First as an RA, then as a member of a fraternity, and then as a participant in another student organization. And I think his motivation is really, I think more people need to be trained, but this is a group that very much became champions for us, and they actually, most of them believe it should be mandatory. I don't agree. I don't think we should force residents to have to know how to do this, RAs, resident assistants, to know how to do this. I do think it should be voluntary, but if you train, think herd immunity, right? If you train enough people, you have that protection in the community. Summary of the barriers that came up out of the research. People were worried about just, will we even know about it? And then they said there was a lack of awareness around the risks of substance mixing. That became very critical to curriculum design, because mixing of opioids with other substances is a huge part of what we're seeing in the overdoses in New York, and the overdose deaths in particular. We have too many cases discovered through either ERs or the medical examiner where people overdosed on opioids and they did not know that they had intentionally taken an opioid. This is not the same in every community. We have our police departments and our labs have confirmed, for example, fentanyl mixed with cocaine. You don't see that in a lot of communities. We have fentanyl mixed into heroin because it's crap quality heroin. So that was a piece that the students just said they didn't understand. You didn't notice that in any one particular group because it was a broader theme. The shame and stigma, which I've talked about, and the buy-ins and the decentralized nature of our campus. Every campus is decentralized. We all just put our own spin on that idea. the piece that really, the two pieces that really drove how we design curriculum were the self-efficacy and this legal repercussions, right? We spent a lot of time in curriculum design around addressing these issues, right? Can I recognize and can I respond in a life-saving manner? Um, the city and the state mandate certain elements in the curriculum, and these were already addressed in the curriculum pieces that we are required to use, and then we can of course add our additional campus community pieces. We found different ways of wording it to make it feel more digestible to our students, and we've been testing the self-efficacy um, with our research. And there's one of the tools that I shared, and I'll talk about a little bit later, is a tool that you can use around this. And then the legal repercussions. What's going to happen for me? What's going to happen for the person that I help? So we have incorporated the policy piece is not a required element of the curriculum from the city or the state for us, but is something that we heard so loud and clear that it was a reason people might not reach out to help, and we wanted them to reach out and help. So we spent a lot of time, and we have slides on, what the Good Sam law in New York does and doesn't cover, right? There's a lot of things it does, but there are exceptions. And then we, of course, talk about what our campus policy is and how that supports both the person who is helping and the person who is being helped. A couple of the recommendations that came out of this work with these groups, they really wanted it to feel specific to the institution. That was very, very important to them. We, as an institution, have gotten rid of a lot of the out-of-the-box training type programs around health and well-being. We don't use tools like Alcohol EDU anymore because students felt like it was just too generic and it didn't reflect the Columbia experience. Not that they could successfully define the Columbia experience, but they just knew that wasn't it. So learning from that, as well as this process, we said it had to feel very, very localized. They wanted incentives. We chose to do that through the benefit clarification, like professional goal alignment, the School of Social Work being an example, our Public Health Club, a number of others, building those champions among the students. So they're inviting people to do trainings, to host trainings and do more, as opposed to us asking people if they want to do trainings. Communicating through multi-strategies, which I think we all face, right? The sad reality of our work is the one way to share the same information with everyone on campus at exactly the same time is email. That's the only strategy that accomplishes that. Those elements combined, and that's, as a result, that's why we get so many emails with announcements that nobody reads. In fact, many of my colleagues are amazed at how much I know about what's going on campus, and my answer is always the same. I read my email. They wanted easy access to kits on campus. We're accomplishing that by having more people with kits. They wanted the clarification, which I think I've already talked about, and they wanted a specific connection to other life-saving approaches like CPR. And CPR mentions are optional in the curriculum that the city and the state give us. We have chosen to, we did a way of kind of informally measuring, and we found that a significant proportion of our population had at least at some point been trained in CPR. So we decided to include that as a mandatory part of our training, is just to talk about how CPR might fit into a response scenario with an overdose. And every kit we provide includes they're not latex anymore, the gloves though, and the face shields for rescue breathing. So we've just made that a default element of how we set it, and again, driven heavily by these recommendations that came out of groups. So this is the point where I want you, and I'm going to ask you to kind of think about this through the break and use the handout on stakeholders, which I can, if you give me a half second, I can get to. The stakeholder piece is designed to say, who are your supporters and who's going to challenge you, right? We're really good about putting together stakeholder groups that might help us, but I think it's equally important, and the same amount of space should be given to who might push back, right? because the more we understand about those that push back, the more we can understand how our champions can help us move our programs to where they want to be. So think about that and maybe populate that your own version of that while we take a few minutes of a break so that folks can stretch and what have you. And then I'll ask you to share some ideas on stakeholders and specifically stakeholders that you think may be challengers to efforts to do this work. It is currently 10:53 in Illinois, and so planned or 10:54 in Illinois. Let's start up at right about the top of the hour. Let's use just about 6 minutes to do a quick stretch, what have you.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you. And so like Michael said, let's meet back at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Alrighty, folks, it's the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of the amount of time we have left and make sure we get into the design, development, implementation, and evaluation. I had a note in the chat that if you want to share ideas on stakeholders that may be challenging or ways to address challenging stakeholders, please continue to keep that conversation going along the way as well. Because honestly, when it comes to getting this going, knowing and knowing how to get past the pushback is often the harder part of doing this great work. So that being said, and it leads into this, who are the helpers? Put together a list based not just on our experience, but in talking to other schools and programs who have done this work. These are the primary collaborative partners that kind of thematically come up around this work. So obviously the students and their student organizations and getting that buy-in, and the campus health, and public safety has already been mentioned, and groups if you have a campus EMS. But thinking about, we talk regularly when we deal with health and higher education about how do academic partners and faculty play a role in this. And it, for us, again, I'll just speak to my own example for a moment, having the person who serves as our medical director and then me as the program director, we both have faculty appointments, so that just opens doors, which makes life a little bit easier, but figuring out who are those faculty champions. So for us, the School of Social Work, the dean of which has connections with other academic departments, who oddly enough reached out via email and said, there's nothing really happening in my school and I'd love to do something about this. And my response was, how exciting. I actually have a training scheduled in your building in an hour and a half. And that actually brought faculty into the room because she put a quick blast out and said, hey, we need to be a part of this, and we need to figure out how this fits into our curriculum. And that's a nice, easy kind of win collaborative partner. But maybe you have somebody who teaches pharmacology, right, who could then figure out how naloxone fits into the conversation in a class, or who might, some of the academic administrators, right, who may say, we want to make this an option. So oddly, through the academic administration channel, we heard from the folks that work in our law library, and we recently completed a training just for the staff in the law library. But it was about going through the academic arena to make those connections. And now they're saying, oh, people in all the libraries should have this training. Interestingly, their reason is because we live in the city, not because they thought they were going to have overdoses in the library. So council we've talked about before, and of course the off-campus partners like local and state health departments. I left the others very blank because I wanted you, as you fill out your own little kind of list of helpers and necessary stakeholders and partners, to think about who are those specifically off-campus community groups with whom you may be able to partner. We first introduced naloxone training for our medical staff by partnering with a community-based nonprofit before we had our own approved program here. And we continue to kind of collaborate with them where we can, especially if we get inquiries from non-affiliates. Because we have a research component, who we train is a little bit more narrow, but only through the end of the academic year when the research completes, and then we'll start inviting broader community members to be a part of our training. And to a certain degree, we've started segmenting training so that we could already begin to do that ahead of our original schedule, just based on demand for training. But who are your community partners, right? Yours are going to be very different than, say, anyone else on our session today. So making sure that your list is very localized. And when it comes to things like making lists, don't write down students as a list, put down names. Right? We can all name a couple of students who are very involved and who might be really good helpers or champions around this. So be specific as opposed to conceptual, and invite them to bring others to the table. I mean, one of the challenges in doing all of this work for us to date has been the number of students who want to be a part of our work group because they think this work is so important and they want to amplify it. And it's like, we don't have enough work to go around for that many students, which is a really, really great problem to have. From a design and development perspective, these are more background pieces around setting all of this up. I've mentioned before, customize, and I want to kind of really reinforce, it needs to not be an out-of-the-box training. Even if you use the curriculum guide that I can send you, your training shouldn't look like mine. It should feel like it's yours. And feel really localized, because that helps build buy-in at the campus level. To the extent you have the resources, even if it's informally, talk to some stakeholders, gather some qualitative feedback, perhaps put together a small quantitative data gathering tool. Again, happy to help with that, so that you can get some information that you can then turn around and include, whether it's written pieces of what you do or just verbal pieces. I use a lot of verbal comments in my training sessions that derive directly from the focus group work that we did, the summary of which you saw a short time ago. And then for us, because we are a registered program with the city and the state, we are required to use a certain bit of content from them. So we took their content, we just reworded it into the language that seemed to test well with our population, so that we can meet our obligations, which secures our continuing access to those naloxone kits, and yet also make it feel like this is in our case, the Columbia version of the training. It's a really, to me, important step in taking this work and making it community, is that it's not just like, oh, somebody said, here's naloxone, and you squirt it up a nose and a person lives, right? You could do naloxone training in 33 seconds that way, kind of thing. But it's not about that. It's more than that. It's about how this helps our communities. It's about how it helps our stakeholders. Lisa added local and state legislators, as well as county boards and court systems. Excellent, excellent partners. And I love that you also mentioned pharmacists and other healthcare professionals. I apologize for not knowing this. I should have had more time to look this up. But take a look, if you haven't, and see if Illinois is a state where you can access naloxone through a pharmacy without having to walk in with a prescription for it. New York is a state where we have open access on naloxone, so you can just walk in and request it. I will tell you a little bit a story about that we heard. It's an N of one, so I don't know what to make of it. But I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. But yes, these are excellent partners. And if you are, for example, a smaller institution, or you don't have an on-campus pharmacy, that's where those opportunities. We do not have a pharmacy on campus, but we do have 6 nearby, one of which is open 24 hours a day. So we have had some conversations with those folks informing our process. Specifically, we really strengthened that outreach when we heard rumors that we weren't going to be able to get naloxone from the city anymore. If that disappeared quickly, we wanted to be able to tell people how they could access it. Some other things and this really speaks to these ideas we were just talking about, talk to the partnerships and the staffing, but do think very carefully, as far in advance as you can, who's going to do this work. And can you even get it into their job description if this is something that you plan to keep going? One of the mistakes that we made and we learned from in our initial design and development process is that we were going to be doing this research in both the student version and the faculty staff version. There was going to be a pre-test, a post-test, and a post-post test at 6 months' time. And because you can only facilitate the trainings and dispense naloxone if you have done the city approved training, I was the only one on campus that could do the training that was approved by the city to do so. So when the demand spiked so much faster than we thought it would, that left 100% of the training responsibility to me. And that is something we had not planned for. In the process of then doing all of this trainings and in doing this for more than 700 people across those sessions in just a few months, one of the things that we realize is it's actually a blessing because of the research component. We're holding the trainer steady. So that's one less variable we have to be worried about in any findings. So we found a good element that came out of it, but at the same time, oh my God, my life would have been so much easier if I had people to do some of those trainings, especially the 2, 3, 4 hours in a row, just back to back to back trainings. It's there's a lot of coffee, and I drink most of it in the world, but there wasn't enough for some of those days. Belinda has offered a link, a state-specific link, and the standing order around pharmacists. So thank you for getting that in there. And again, had COVID not been in the way, that is something I would have known in advance. I also have on this particular slide, to the extent you have the capability, pilot test and evaluate the test so that you can see if some of the materials, some of the pieces that you're doing will resonate. So we tested some of the language on the slides, for example, before we ever did an actual training session, like showing it to students, getting feedback. What do you think we mean when we have these words in this bullet, kind of thing. It was a smaller and much more informal testing of that piece of it in the curriculum design, but we were specifically testing our translation of the required elements. So this is what our training session looks like, to give you a sense. This training, we say, takes a minimum of, the minimum time we'll agree to is 30 minutes. It actually takes less time to get through all this material. We actually ask people for 45 to 60 minutes, specifically so that we have time for the questions. If you do it in a 30-minute with what we've included as what we believe is critical elements, including the CPR references and spending very specific time on the policy pieces, the campus policy and the state law piece, which we heard from stakeholders in the development. If we cut that short to get it done in 30 minutes, it really doesn't leave much time for Q&A. And we worry about that. So when we do these shorter sessions, we always make sure that the trainer, which is no longer thankfully just me, is always available for time after, so that if the question wasn't answered during the session, it can be answered before the person leaves the space. So, Jamie's talking about in the chat about costs, and we will come to that expense and the insurance piece in just a few minutes. So thank you for sharing that. I will gladly share curriculum documents with you, and let me know kind of what's helpful. We do have a written kind of lesson plan, if you will, for the training, and very, very happy to share that. And then the evaluations, which in our bullet says online after today's session, which I believe will actually be true, but we do online evaluations using our Qualtrics account, the pre and post test for this, of which a PDF version has already been shared with you. In terms of implementing, here are some key pieces, and I want to take a quick moment to jump back over to the handouts. There is a handout, two-page piece called Program Design Considerations, and this is really designed to complement what we're doing right now, the pieces I'm talking through, where you can put your own responses or answers to varying pieces, and it may include items that you hadn't thought about, like storage, for example. That is something that I had not thought about until I had 800 doses of naloxone in my office, almost like a fort around my desk. So some more specific pieces though, who's in charge, right? Who takes the lead? That lead includes the record keeping pieces, depending on the setup of a program. Because we are a state and city approved program, I have to file monthly reports with the city and quarterly reports with the state. Thankfully, the state reports are just a summary of the quarter from the city reports. New York is one of those fun little states where New York City does it one way and the rest of the state of New York does it another. And because of our program, we have to do both. So we had to factor in, and I ended up appointing someone in my team as the keeper of the records and the aggregator of data so that we could quickly and easily file those reports. Because if we don't file them in a timely manner, we lose access to naloxone. We also ran into a very, very interesting question along the way of what is the record retention policy? In the state of New York, when a program gives you a naloxone kit, you have to fill out what's called a naloxone recipient form, or NERF. These forms are paper at the moment, and even the city wasn't sure how long we had to keep them. They ultimately landed on 3 years, and I said 3 years from when? from the date we did the training, from the expiration date of the naloxone dose, because that's on the form. Like, we need to know from when. They still haven't been able to tell me the 3 years from. We have decided to opt, they have given us the option to, because we scan them, that we can retain them digitally, and that allows us to, we've just added it to our record retention policy, and we're going to use the state 7-year any health related record piece, even though that's longer than we're required to in this piece. But again, it was one of those, a lead office, and in this case, it's the administrative unit within our student health piece, and it's not our health promotion program that leads this, although our eventual plan is to transition this to be a program that is managed by and led by our health promotion team. I've talked a little bit already about the staffing, but I really want to encourage you as you either think about implementing or design a plan to implement or update or enhance, you're going to need some person power on this. And it's going to be more than you think it is, because I think we all find that it tends to be more. Some of which you may be able to do with students as key stakeholders and partners. Stuffing the kits is something that's pretty easy for our students to do. Teaching them and having them approved as trainers is another great way to meet the staffing. Some of us have been around long enough that we've grown tired of doing, 8 o'clock at night programs on a Sunday, and we'd like to be home with our families. Whereas in the younger part of my career, I'd been like, sure, why not? I've got nothing to do. That things shift over time. So how are you going to meet those kind of needs? And medical oversight, depending on what your program requirements are, we do have to have a direct medical oversight. We have a standing order. In New York, we have to record the prescriber information on what we call the blue card, which goes with every kit. And so we needed to make sure we had someone who was on board. In fact, all orders for materials have to be signed by the medical oversight person, not me as the program director, which was an interesting kind of piece. And so my boss is the AVP and medical director, and she's a huge supporter of this work and a believer in this work. And she just signs whatever I put in front of her on this, because she knows we've got it managed. But it became an interesting one of like, oh, she's about to go on vacation for 2 weeks out of the country. Sign an order form just in case I need to order while you're away, because it required that medical signature, and we can only have one approved medical person in our program. That's one of our requirements, is that it can't be signed by a backup. So it's a weird little program implementation thing that we had to put into our planning documents, which we did not actually think about in advance, but looking back, we're like, okay, now we have a plan. The piece I think folks need to spend the most time on is the sustainability, though. It's not actually difficult to find some resources, especially when people are excited about doing this work, to start something. But how do we keep it going if it helps? Right? There are too many programs in higher education that have ended when the grant ended. Right? My own work, when I was at a community college in Florida, I think the title was Alcohol and Drug Program Coordinator through a FIPSI grant way back into the 90s. And my job ended when the grant ended. And the school was very transparent about that. It's like, we have this money, it goes for this long, and we're not institutionalizing this. So I had to think about how could any of that work continue, even though I wasn't going to be there post-funding period. So if you are going to build a program, if you already have one going, kind of how are you going to keep the pieces moving? We did think very much about cost if the city stopped funding the supply of naloxone. And you'll see this on an upcoming slide, but to create a naloxone kit would cost us approximately $80 per kit, a kit containing 2 doses. That is not something our budget can absorb. So we haven't solved all of those problems in terms of our sustainability plan for keeping this program going, but we at least know what our number is now. So we know how to figure out, and certain things we can absorb. We can absorb copying the instructions. We can get the gloves through the supplies we have in our medical service and well, not right now we can't, but in a non-COVID world, we have regular access to gloves. The rescue breathing masks, also not a terribly high cost item. It's the naloxone that's the high cost for us. Even doing bags and printing them with the instructions on it wouldn't be that expensive relative to the total piece. So I think every one of us has a responsibility as we spin up these programs to figure out how to keep them going if it works, right? I'd love to believe that we get to a point where we see opioid misuse, opioid overdoses pretty much disappear, but I don't think we will. And one of the things that's unique about opioid overdoses relative to some other substances, a person who is having an overdose has no conscious awareness that that is occurring. So there's no moment at which they would be able to self-administer naloxone. So it's always going to require us teaching people how to help. And that's something we have to plan for if we're going to be successful long term with our initiatives. This is my favorite slide. That's the evaluation professor talking. Part of sustaining a program is being able to show that it's actually accomplishing something in the world. And I've split the evaluation piece really into process and outcome. Process is what most people ask me for. Outcome is what I really want to know. It's easy to see how many people fill out an interest form. We did would you be interested in doing a naloxone education training form at our health expo that's part of new student orientation. And we had hundreds of first year students say, yes, I would like to do that. Over 100 of which actually then signed up and attended, which are the next two pieces. So I could look at, of those interested, how many registered? Of those registered, how many showed up? One of the sessions I did, 73 first semester students, brand new 17, 18-year-olds, but thought this was important. And a couple of them brought people who weren't on the sign up. So the 73 is the number of first years, not the total number of people that were in that room. But it gives us a way to measure and kind of say, oh, wow, if we have, 700 people say they're interested, we now have, and we've done this with a number of sessions, we have a formula to know approximately what proportion of those will actually register. For us, it's around 65% will actually register for a session. And then of that, about 80% will show up. So we have a way to project how many people might be in sessions now, thanks to using our initial process metrics. You do need to keep track of the number of trainings, right? That slide of 700 people, 37 sessions, 5 months, people are like, whoa. And I'm like, yeah, I know, right? This is really, really important things. Like we're training a large proportion of people. And what was the last thing we were able to do where 700 people showed up willingly and got trained to do something that was life-saving, right? Best case, CPR might be that way. So it has an amazing good news story to tell in that piece alone. We do carefully keep track of the kits distributed. That's a requirement. And the doses administered, that's also a requirement. But it also helps us get a sense of how many kits are out there, right? And that number can be combined with other programs distributing kits in our communities to have a sense of how much naloxone is out in our community and available to help when it's needed. The other process metric, which doesn't have a straight up number to it, is if you're going to have multiple people doing the training, you want to develop a process evaluation that looks at fidelity to training. Are people actually following the curriculum that you've set up? It's a piece of training that is often overlooked when we think about how we evaluate training. So, is this going the way? Are the different people talking about the things that they should be talking about? On the outcome side, right, how many lives are saved? You're going to have far fewer lives saved than the number of doses you put out there. That's the point, right? It isn't needed every time, but it is there when it's needed. We did look at self-efficacy because that was a huge theme in both the literature as well as our piece. We are also looking at knowledge. We're trying to look at ways to measure the impact and availability of naloxone. That piece is still in development. And then there are two scales that I want to call your attention to. There's the OOAS and OOKS. These are two validated scales that look at knowledge and attitude, so it helps with the self-efficacy piece and the direct knowledge measurement piece, both of which influenced the evaluations that we are using in our pre, post, and post-post design. both the instructions and the actual instruments were in the resources that were emailed out, so that you have these original tools as resources to help build evaluation pieces. The other point that I will offer on evaluation, I teach a program evaluation class every fall semester. If you are in a planning stage or you have a program but not yet an evaluation plan for it, my students will work in small groups to develop evaluation plans for either existing or in development health programs on college campuses throughout the country. So if you need a plan for the evaluation built for you, I am happy to have a class do that, class group work with you to do that. It's very low lift on your part. It usually requires a grand total of 3 to 4 hours over the course of a semester, not in large chunks. And some of that time is just emailing documents to them so that they can have those background pieces to build an evaluation. They won't actually conduct the evaluation for you, but they will develop a complete plan with the what, whys, and hows, and then hand it off to you to then begin doing the evaluation on your campus. And they are all trained to try to build it using the existing resources of your institution. So plans don't come with recommendation one, hire somebody to do this. Again, very happy to do it. And if you have an opportunity for a group that is not naloxone, I'm also willing to ask groups to do that. They have worked quite successfully with the University of Alabama at Birmingham several times now. We've had a group up in Syracuse, and we've had some other folks at Tulane had a group, two groups actually this past semester. So the students are quite accustomed to working with folks that aren't nearby. And I think it's a great way. Many of us want to do more evaluation, but don't necessarily have time to build the plans for it. And this is a great curricular infusion opportunity to bring those pieces together. And I did have a group help design the evaluation of the program that we are now running. In terms of using those pieces then and trying to say, well, what does this mean on my campus, right? These are the high level pieces, and I'm trying to get through this piece quickly so that I can get to your questions about building and implementing and evaluating. And again, please start throwing those in the chat box if you have them already, so that we can speak to them. Or again, you're most welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally. That gaining administrative buy-in, we've talked about, some of these pieces already. Liability is a big one for a lot of folks. This is where state law can be your friend, but really figuring out kind of going back to the questions and answers piece, anticipating what they're going to worry about and having the answer ready, so that there's less of the let me get back to yous, right? Which kind of feeds into their, well, you're not even sure why we would do this. You want to be sure, let's do that prep work. I'm always happy to play devil's advocate on a phone call with someone and just pretend to be the one who's concerned from your campus and help you figure out how to come up with and prepare answers to questions. But the liability is going to be the big one, right? Does it mean admitting we have a problem, which is one form of liability? What does the institutional liability coverage offer in terms of actual legal protections if doses are administered, et cetera? The second one, and this is where that $80 average shows up, is finding the money, right? The kits are very expensive, and if you do send someone to a pharmacy, depending on their insurance, it could be very, very expensive. The out-of-pocket cost for naloxone is scary, is the best way to put it. Although, and this unfortunately should not be a debate on the cost of prescription medications in the United States system. The nasal naloxone spray, which is the only version we offer, is a little bit less expensive than the auto injector. If you haven't seen it, the auto injector is not unlike the ones it's kind of like I liken it to an AED. It literally talks to you and walks you through the steps of it successfully administering IM naloxone. Lot of what we learned in our research is people were afraid if they had to use needles to administer naloxone, which is why we are 100% nasal spray. There's no difference in efficacy on the whole, so we've gone with what is the easiest for the layperson, and it's slightly less expensive than those auto injectors are. Um, I'll talk in a minute about the other pharmacy flip side here. We, as I've acknowledged, don't have a plan yet for the funding if for the actual naloxone doses. I figured out how to fund the rest of the kit. So if I needed to, I have enough pieces figured out that um, I can focus my attention on finding the funding. And and I will admit, Columbia University is a pretty well-resourced institution. But we are fully funded by the student health fee that we have, which means there is a hard line on how much money there is. I don't have an option. I get no general ledger funding from the institution. So I have a real responsibility to be thoughtful in how we use the students' money. And right now, there is just none available that would cover the cost of acquiring that medication. It is also part of what my thinking about anticipated future problems. If I do start funding with a student health fee, given the fact that so far all the lives saved have been non-Columbia affiliated people, now I'm buying medications that are being administered to non-affiliates. And I anticipate that if it got to that point, somebody's going to challenge me on that issue. That's where I would go, hey, not about you. It's about the bigger community. It's about doing the right thing in society, thinking about our broader global mission as an institution, not actually going to make that person happy. It's a political thing I'm worried about as a potential future item. The campus curriculums, I've talked about that before, but please borrow. What I can offer is not the only one. The other school that has done a huge amount of this training is the University of Texas at Austin through their pharmacy school. They're a good contact. Lucas Hill, I believe is his last name, and I'm happy to share his contact information. He would love to hear from people. He's very passionate about doing this work. He and I don't see eye to eye on 100% of the work. I'll just share that with you. He believes you should just have naloxone kits in a room and tell people to come pick them up and include instructions. We believe in a more proactive training because we learned about the concerns around self-efficacy. I don't want people to have the kit and not feel like they know how to use it. And so the training helps us make sure that people feel better about the how to use it. And then what I've been talking to all along is the sustainability plan, right? As you build and launch these programs, how do you keep them going, right? How do we make sure that if we've got this literally life-saving program available to our campus communities, that we don't suddenly take it away because some piece of it, the person who was leading the trainings moves on, or the student leader who is the champion graduates, right? We've all probably had a scenario where some piece of the work happening on campus took a step backwards because the student champion graduated and other people weren't as passionate about moving something forward. I think the greatest weakness in most plans is when they're driven by a single personality. It's why I didn't want to be the only trainer because I faced a scenario where I had to postpone a training because I was so nauseated I couldn't stand up, which meant I couldn't drive to campus and stand and deliver a training. So I did the right thing. I stayed home, but I had to postpone a training because at the time we had no other trainers, right? And we said that we can't have that happen again. So making sure that we now have a cohort of 11 people who can do the training. Although I'm still doing most of the trainings that are tied to the research for that consistency piece. And then even more considerations. This, by the way, is a picture of what's actually in our kit. So you see we get the little blue bags from the city, what is naloxone, which also includes the instruction steps, the gloves, the rescue breathing mask, the 2 doses, and then the magic blue card. Because naloxone is a prescription, that blue card, and it's given out in a standing order, it serves as the prescription. So folks that travel, for example, I always remind them if you travel with a prescription, you should keep it in the original container, or you should carry a copy of your prescription, even though it's highly unlikely you will ever be asked for it. The blue card serves as the prescription for the naloxone, and it includes the reporting information and access to refilling kits information on the backside. Those blue cards, by the way, we are required to use that format by the city. We were able to convince them to give us a PDF of the document, so we did not have to hand complete the name of the prescriber, et cetera, on every single card. We were able to pre-populate most of the information, leaving out only the name of the person that was trained. Otherwise, that would have just slowed things down in unbelievably annoying ways. I've talked a little bit about individual versus communal kits, and that's really an institutional decision. It sounds like some of you have individual kits that are treated in a communal way, right? These are the people or the offices that have kits that can help in a scenario. Um, Personally, I'm a big believer the more people you have trained, the more naloxone that's out there, the more likely it's going to be close by, right? That's my personal bent on the issue. If you can only get an agreement for communal kits, that is better than not having kits at all, right? So take the win and chip away at the argument about how do we get even more people doing this work. The nasal versus injectable, which I was just talking about, we chose nasal. It's about the self-efficacy piece that ties to our research. Our School of Nursing is currently using injectable naloxone because they're dispensing kits only to people who are studying nursing who have already been taught how to do injections. So that's a population-specific piece that can be flexible. I've talked about who should be your trainers, the medical director piece in the standing order. Some clinicians are, this is where another liability conversation may come up. Some of your prescribing clinicians may go, I don't want all of these doses being handed out to people I don't know under my medical license, right? That's a real question, right? I happen to have a medical director and an immediate supervisor who's like, life-saving medication in hands, life saved, sounds good to me. She also is comfortable with the legal protections. She did take the time to read it, but was fine with it. So I feel very fortunate that I didn't really have to try on that one, but I think others really do struggle. She is available to talk with folks on other campuses if they are concerned about being the prescriber behind a program. I wouldn't ask her this week or maybe next, but once we start to move towards whatever our new normal is going to be, I can assure you that she will gladly make time to have that conversation. The prescribing policies, this is about linking to broader programs. So things like the contracts that I mentioned that we firmly rejected based on our harm reduction approach. For us as an institution, they may be appropriate to your institution though. And that connection with safe disposal. We actually also serve as a disposal site for expired naloxone. So anybody that had been trained elsewhere and received naloxone, if their dose has expired, they can bring it to us and we will take care of it. We will replace it even if we did not initially train them. And then we are able to get that recently expired naloxone actually can still be used. So we donate the recently expired to a community organization. The long expired, we actually convert the nasal sprays into test kits. Storage, I mentioned, living behind a wall of boxes of naloxone for a little while. It depends on what you can do. We do now use a lean model. So now that we have regular access to supply, but at one point I ordered and the city said, nope, don't have enough. And so it became a matter of, well, how much is enough to be sure we can fulfill trainings and how much is too much that we don't know where to store it. Depending on how you're accessing naloxone, you may need to have some back and forth conversations there. That was as another example of a conversation that we hadn't anticipated. And it's not that we didn't anticipate not being able to get the kits, right? We always worried about that. We didn't anticipate how much space they would take up. And part of our bulk ordering was the high demand for training. So that was very interesting. And then I've talked a little bit about the mandatory versus voluntary training. We do offer training to all members of the Columbia Health staff. That's 170 people across 6 units. It is not mandatory for them, but almost everyone does it. So nearly everyone in our counseling center, our admin staff, our disability services team, most of them have now been through the training. The trainings are done as a mixed group, so there is no kind of, oh, who's not here kind of moment, and there's no pressure to participate just because everyone else in my group within the organization is doing it. We don't want people going through the training if they're not wanting to be there. And it's actually now listed as an item in optional training in our onboarding program. So we're going voluntary within our organization. I think we're at 97% trained. The people that aren't trained are literal newbies. These are the people we've hired in the last month or so. Because shockingly, we're getting 100% uptake in our existing staff. And we expected it in medical, we didn't expect it anywhere else. But you'll need to make some decisions about different groups and what makes sense. Because of our public safety role, they do feel like it should be mandatory for their frontline officers because they are first responders in many ways. And obviously it was mandatory for our EMS Corps because it's a part of their work. And then there's even more considerations, right? And I'm sharing all of these because many of them are lessons learned from us and from others. Most of my examples are from my program because I know the examples better. But a lot of what we've had to come up with plans for has been because of colleagues that were generous and shared their ideas and helped us understand. Refill management. Every dose of naloxone is going to come with an expiration date. How are you tracking that so that you can notify people that their naloxone is about to expire, and how are they going to get more, and what happens if they graduated between the time you trained them and gave them their naloxone and now they need replacement and they're not on or near campus. We've started building networks of programs around the country, just contacts that we can keep so that if we hear from somebody in an area, we're like, hey, this is a program we know about. Are you going to do incentives to, at least to get this ball rolling? Or if you're going to do a research and evaluation component, do you want to incentivize? We don't incentivize participation in the training. We held firm on you are not going to get a gift card to come to a training. You're going to go to a training because you want to be at the training. We are, however, going to give you a gift card to do the pre and post test. But that is only good for the duration of the research. And what we're finding is sessions that are being offered that are not research sessions. We are seeing no difference in signups and attendance than those sessions where there are pre and post test incentives for the evaluation. That suggests to us, at least based on our current levels of data, that people are actually participating because they want to be there. We are also very, very fascinated by the population of people who would go through a training and not take a kit at the end. It's personally, I'm very interested in people who willingly get trained on something in a very voluntary way and then choose not to take the life-saving medication with them. We expected a much higher proportion of people. Our current N in that group is 7. We've invited all 7 to participate in the qualitative conversation. None of them, unfortunately, have agreed. Well, actually, none of them have responded, so we don't even know if they would agree. But we did launch that piece right about the time kind of things went crazy with COVID. So I don't know that their hesitation to talk with us has anything to actually to do with the topic. It may just be we're trying to figure out what's going on in the world right now. But you need to decide what you do around incentives, right? This was a big piece for us, for example, with RAs. Like we didn't want 100% of RAs trained, but only 50% of them are there because they wanted to be the other 50% were there for the free crap. Free crap gets them in the room, but that's not necessarily what's going to get them to use the naloxone to save a life. So, and if you can't tell, I have lots of opinions on that topic. How are you going to manage media inquiries, right? Who's going to take those inquiries? Who's going to respond? If you're used to media management, you know that media response cycles are very, very short duration. The CNN article that I showed you the picture of earlier, I was interviewed and quoted in that article, but I ended up doing that interview at 10 a.m. on a Saturday from home because that was the only way I could do it and ensure that the good news was included in the story. And so you're going to have a plan for that. And it's not something that by design people put into the beginning of their planning. Definitely become at least loose experts on the law and policy relative to your campus and state pieces. If you have community level policies that lie on top of the state and institutional ones, make sure to factor those in. And you basically you need to know them better than anyone else in the room. Because the first question you will get will always be the one you're probably not ready for. There is a link in the resources section to PDAPs, which is a great resource that can help you learn about, and that's where this map comes from. This is an older map. This is from 2018, but it was at the time I put the slides together. This was the most recent map they had, showing states that did and did not have some level of a Good Samaritan policy. Not all state policies are the same, and if you are in an institution that's very close to a state line, like we are, you need to know the Good Samaritan policies for more than just Illinois. You'll need to know your neighboring state policies as well, because you can expect that students will ask questions about that. So I have to know something about the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut policies, just as a standard course of action. And then reporting requirements, how are you going to manage those? For us, it's based on our registration as a state and local program. But it changes the curriculum sometimes. So I mentioned earlier the NERF, the naloxone reporting form, that every recipient of a kit receives. There's two sides to it. The front side has basic demographic data of the recipient of the kit. The back side has one question. It's the name. The city and the state do not want the back of the form. That's why we scan them. We scan only the front side, but we had to adjust the curriculum to explain why we're collecting names. Because and why it goes on the back of the form. So it is a part of the reporting form, but it's actually a different piece. We associate the name with the email address and the expiration date of the naloxone so that we can send a message and say, "Dear Aisha, the naloxone we gave you in the training is scheduled to expire next month. Here's how you can get a replacement." That is what we do with the names. There are 3 people at our institution who have access to that name database, and we share that in the training, that we are required to report to the city the demographics that you put on the form. We are not required to report the name, and we're going to keep that separate. It doesn't seem to matter in our population. They don't seem to care. There are certain populations where people are very, very worried about their name being associated with the fact that they have naloxone. This is primarily recovery communities. There is some connection to people who are previously incarcerated, because there are some folks that say, "Oh, you have naloxone, that means you have a problem, and therefore, we should watch you because you're a user, or you're using again, or what have you." And it doesn't necessarily mean that at all, but there are some attitudes out there. This is where I want to mention the pharmacy example. We had a report, again, it was just one report from an individual who's not campus affiliated, but we learned this through our community partnerships. A person who learned through a training that naloxone was available at the pharmacy. So she went to the naloxone. Her insurance covered the naloxone. She had a very affordable copay. And her whole point was to have naloxone because there are known users in her neighborhood. And she just wanted to have it, and she wanted to be available to help if she needed to. She then received reports receiving outreach from her insurance company about treatment resources for her substance use because she accessed naloxone. Her point, and it was one of those very unexpected things for her, that, hey, I tried to do a good thing and help in my community, and now my insurance company thinks I'm a user. Again, it's an N of 1. If you've heard similar pieces, I would love to learn about that, because I do think there are other examples like that, and it would, from a policy advocacy perspective, I think there may be some opportunities that we can be a part of to help really break through that stigma and say people are accessing naloxone not necessarily because of risk to themselves or members of their family, but because they can save lives, right? So these are kinds of policy-driven pieces that we have to be very aware of and very prepared to answer questions for. One of the very early questions I got when I started training is, does the student health insurance plan on our campus cover naloxone? And it does, and we had, that office reports to me, I need to know that answer, but other people have been caught off guard by questions like that. Then there's more, right? I feel like I've been going on and on and on, and I think we're doing okay on time. We have a few minutes relative to what I have noted as the schedule, but so a few other things. Right, we learned in particular. We built it. They came in large numbers, and they came fast, much faster than we thought we had capacity ready for. So, what's your plan if that happens? Part of what I did is add the one-on-one so that those that were asking for trainings for a localized need could get it, and it actually spread out some of the workflow. The supply challenges, I shared one of ours. Other institutions have reported very significant supply challenges, some driven by cost, some just driven by the uptake in programs. Then I mentioned the names, naloxones, the pharmacy and insurance piece. I mentioned the record retention already, I think enough. the other two, which are the bottom bullets, reading left to right, MAT, because we have students in recovery, you should think about whether it's appropriate to have prescribers for medication-assisted treatment on your campus. This is another area where we like to brag relative to the rest of the Ivy League. We have 4 prescribers that can do MAT. The rest of the Ivies combined have 0. Well, I take that back. They have 1 who has the waiver to do so, but he only does it in the community. He doesn't do it on campus. So we're the only ones doing MAT prescribing on campus. We do maintenance. We do not do initiation of MAT on campus at this point. Our prescribers are not quite ready to do initiation of therapy, but they are more than happy to. And this actually came about accidentally. One of our project team workers is a nurse practitioner in our medical service, and we were just talking about, well, we should probably think about MAT as a next step in our broad naloxone opioid work. And she's like, that's a great idea. I'm going to start looking into it. And literally that afternoon, she had a patient ask her about it. And it's like, okay, well, at least we anticipated the question. We just didn't anticipate the question will be on the same day we had the conversation. And that person then, so she did the waiver. If you have NPs doing your prescribing, at least in New York, the amount of training they have to do for the waiver is about twice as long as it is for physicians. So we have both um, physicians in the medical service, psychiatrists in the mental health service, and NPs in the medical service, all as prescribers now for this. We also got too many students asking us the question about, can you also give us test kits so that we can see if, for example, fentanyl has been mixed into our stuff? No, we can't give you the kits. If our Students for Sensible Drug Policy, SSDP chapter, happens to have a kit, we're not going to confiscate it. But institutionally, because of the way the federal requirements are, we can't provide the kits or conduct the testing. But because we're rooted in a harm reduction framework, we will say the test kits could be helpful if you have access to one, but remember, it doesn't test for everything. And it's a question that really came out of what we were doing with the naloxone training, even though we didn't actually see it as specifically directly related to naloxone. And then the other unexpected question that we had to be prepared for was, what do you do? One of the response steps in naloxone is you make that EMS call for help so somebody can get medically evaluated. What if somebody doesn't want to make that call? What if they're so worried, they want the help, but they don't want to call, for example, 911, because in addition to the ambulance coming, police usually respond. So we worked with students and other community organizations to understand how, and our training now includes the call as a step, but there's a three-piece explanation of, if somebody either can't or won't make that call for help, here's how you can still work to support the safety of the person that's revived using naloxone. Another bit of an unexpected that has reshaped our curriculum. Okay, that's a lot of information, a lot of resources. Hopefully it's got you thinking. Hopefully you've been using some of those tools to make notes about how this can be hopefully helpful and useful for you. So what questions, right? What haven't we talked about that you want to? There's me again answering questions. And it would be lovely if somebody wanted to unmute and ask a question verbally. Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate the comment about the thoroughness. We've been putting this together, really tried to think about all the things we knew going in, all the things we didn't know, and kind of we made some mistakes along the way, and we had great colleagues that told us what mistakes they made along the way or what unexpecteds they faced. And we're really hopeful that by sharing the aggregate of their input and our experiences and others, that it can really help people build and sustain these life-saving programs on college campuses. While we wait to see if other questions come in, let me just mention some of the resources, and we'll come back and check the pieces. So there are web links. The PDF version of the slides of this slide deck was already shared with you. So these should be clickable within that. But I've written out the URLs as well so that you can, if for some reason the clicking doesn't work for your system, that you could then directly type them in, or as I call it, the old days of having to know long URLs. So the CDC has some great resources on opioid overdoses, DEA, specifically if you don't yet participate in the Take Back Day and want to learn about doing that. The SAFE project, the naloxone state finder is actually one that we use when people say, I have a friend who goes to school in, and then they name a state or an institution. We use that. That's one of the tools we use to help us figure out what resources may be available to others. For those of you that do a lot of work with your law enforcement communities, the Department of Justice has a toolkit around naloxone that we have found really helped us think about how we have the conversation with our public safety team, and how our campus straddles 2 police precincts in New York City, and some of that language has helped us as we talk with our partners in the 2-4 and the 2-6, as they say. The PDAPS database on Good Samaritan laws is linked there. And then the naloxone overdose prevention laws, which is a different set of laws that may also apply. Both of those specific data set links are included. I also included some of the web stories about our work because it really presents positive news around doing naloxone pieces, hoping that they may be useful if you're trying to build the case for, like, hey, look, here's good news around this issue. Here's a campus doing this work not as a result of a death or some other tragedy. If those can be helpful, and worst case scenario, you might be able to use them as models for creating ways to share information about your great work. Some additional resources that I am happy to send out. I've named some of these along the way. The curriculum model, you already have the pre-post. I didn't send you the post-post, but if you want the 6-month follow-up, if you are interested in some technical assistance working with me and members of our project team, we're happy to do calls or Zooms or what have you. If travel ever resumes at a more normal level, I would love to come back to Illinois and see more parts of the state and maybe, say hi to some folks along the way. I believe it or not, I do have pictures of us doing this work other than at the White House, but they're the most fun pictures. So that's the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy with me, with my boss, who's on the left. And then that's our faculty research partner from the School of Public Health, kind of towards the front. Lisa shared a couple of additional resources, the Lake County Opioid Initiative and Live for, I'm going to say Lolly as the pronunciation, in Arlington Heights are also great resources. Thank you for sharing those. There are likely other great Illinois-specific resources as well. And please continue to share those with each other. A big part of how we find success in doing this work is by sharing what we learn, what we found, what tools we have, etc. And let me know what else I can do. I believe that we're going to save even more lives when we build more programs. So please let me know how I can help you with the programmatic work that you're either doing or attempting to do. And with that, we are I think, right about at time. I haven't seen any other questions come in. Aisha, anything else from your side?
I just have, a few minor things or some reminders to give to folks. But before I do that, I wanted to thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation. I myself got a lot out of it, and I love the resources that you've shared with us. and the handouts. I believe that those will be very helpful for all of our campuses. So thank you again so much.
Oh.
And definitely I want to bring you to Illinois, possibly next year to do the in-person training. I think that would be, wonderful to have that available to everyone.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. And I do think in a different world, it would have. I think there would have been less of my voice and more of yours. And there really is a value to hearing from each other. So I do want to thank you, those of you that are jumping in, and I'm sure you'll continue to share with each other through the network with IHEC. And should it be possible to visit and do a training, I'm also happy to include an actual naloxone training and bring kits for those that haven't yet been trained.
That would be awesome. I think I could speak for everybody when I said that we would really enjoy having that available to us in Illinois. And thank you again for taking the time out of your day. I know that being, in your position, you've been very busy with the virus, attention and things like that. And then we actually all have, and I know in different departments, we've all got our roles to play concerning this virus. And I appreciate the time you took out to be with us today. And back for all of you.
Yeah, it's thrilling to talk about something. And if you need a little giggle about all of us doing nothing but COVID work, what I say to people is, "Oh, you must be so busy." And I respond with, "Yes, I've gone viral." It's a dad joke, but it does make some people laugh.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure.
And we are going to be sending out, within the next 7 days or so. Again, it's going to depend on staffing and who we have available, but that's my goal, is to get those evaluations emailed to everyone that attended so we can get some feedback. And of course, I'll share that with you at the end as well. And certificates, CEUs that people have been wanting, those will also be sent out too. And those will be between 7 and 10 days is our goal as well. If you have any questions or you need them sooner, please email me directly and we'll get working on that. Also, for those of you that are advisory board members, don't forget about our meeting at 1:15, and it'll be a brief one, but I do appreciate anyone that can show up at that call. That would be great. If you guys don't have any other questions for me, I know you're busy, and I'll let you get back to your workday. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Stay safe and well.